Good morning to all the colleagues that are joining. At this point, we're inviting everyone to rename themselves, indicating their name of delegation or affiliation first in capitals and then their name. Thank you very much and welcome.
Good morning, everyone. This is another reminder to update your nameplate. Please rename yourselves now
Me too,
by
Henrietta.
inserting the country that you're representing first in all caps and then your name. For those who are PRs and DPRs, that should be inserted immediately after the country you're representing and then your name. Thank you.
Good morning, distinguished delegates. Good morning, Mr. Administrator. We're going to be starting in a few minutes. It's 10 a.m., so hopefully we will be starting on time. Please remember to rename yourselves country of adscription in capitals first, ideally. If PR or DPR could kindly indicate that. If colleagues from capital are connecting to the meeting, that would be helpful as well to get it indicated. So colleagues from capital can kindly indicate that they are requesting the floor from capital. That would be perfect. And just a point of order in terms of the use of the chat function, you know this is available for you to post questions, questions that are contained in the statements that you're posting on PaperSmart, or questions that have not been responded yesterday due lack of time will be responded by the agencies in writing. We will try to look at the questions that are posed on the chat, and the chair has requested us to present them to the panelists as well. So we are ready to start in a few minutes. Thank you.
Are we ready, Johnny?
We are ready, Mr. President. We have 142 participants so far, and all the panelists are ready for you. So it's at 3 minutes past 10.
I shall start in a second. I got my braille connected.
Excellent.
Good morning to all. And it is once again my pleasure to welcome so many of you, all of you, to this very important and very interesting first ever virtual board meeting of the UNFPA, UNOPS, UNDP board. We began as yesterday, and we had a very successful day to begin this process. I now declare the meeting open for the second virtual meeting of the annual session 2020 of the executive board of the three agencies, UNDP, UNFPA, UNOPS. It is my privilege to be the chair and lead this segment on the UNDP. Today, we will start the UNDP's segment, and we will have an interactive dialogue with the UNDP's administrator. I am pleased to welcome my friend Achim Steiner once again to be with us. I will ask that this be as interactive as possible. I want to appreciate and acknowledge the group presentations from yesterday that helped us move things along. We want to assure you that national statements that are either submitted by PaperSmart or on PaperSmart or presented, that if there are questions within those national statements, those questions will be answered by the principals of the agencies who will receive those statements and review them and respond to any question. If we are unable to get to every question that is even asked from the floor, we will, however, promise to respond as well. And Jordi and his team is monitoring that you use the raise hand question and you use the write-in format so that you can write in your questions if you have any, and we will get to those as well. To make it as interactive as possible, we welcome questions from your seat, if you might, so that in response to what you hear right now, so it's not just a prepared statement, that allows for greater interactivity and greater interaction between the administrator and his team and us as board members, and particularly in the circumstances into which we find ourselves working, into the environment that we find ourselves working at this unusual time. The administrator will deliver his intervention to the executive board, and at the end of that, we will ask questions. Mr. Steiner is joined by Mr. Wahaba, the associate administrator, and as well as with members of the UNDP leadership team present today at this virtual meeting on this virtual podium. Before I give the floor to Mr. Steiner, UNDP would like to display a short video to introduce this segment. I would like to ask the Secretariat to now play the video. Thank you. Thank you, Secretariat. Thank you, UNDP, for that introductory video. I will now give the floor to the administrator. Akim, welcome, and always a pleasure to have you. You have the floor, please, sir.
Thank you so much, President. Good morning, Excellencies, dear colleagues. This was an exercise in speed reading for those who followed the video. I know there were a lot of facts, President. The video essentially presented a number of results from our annual report, and we wanted to give them to you just in a very quick succession, because I think sometimes in looking at the details of what we do every day and the particular concerns we have, it is easy to overlook the sheer scale and also coverage of the over 2,800 projects that UNDP currently hosts, manages, supports, the 17,000 staff that are operating in these 170 countries. And so I hope the video was a little bit of an overview, and we will obviously not test your memory in the course of the board meeting. President, we meet at a difficult time, and I thank you again for coming together in this virtual format. I think we all feel very committed to continuing to keep the work of the board going, to maintain the accountability, but also to have the opportunity to seek your guidance, your feedback on how we are progressing. We are meeting in the midst of COVID-19, disruptive, traumatic, disturbing in terms of the outlook for many countries and communities. A great deal of risk has emerged just now that both amplifies previous risks, but also vulnerabilities have become so absolute in this moment. And I think it is difficult to gather quite how far-reaching what is happening around us will be for individual communities, families, but also for development at large. And it reminds me of the fact that, you know, we often hear the term now pre-COVID normal, and can we return to it? Well, I think much of what we have learned in the last few weeks has also shown us the Achilles heels of development pathways, of development promises perhaps not fulfilled, and therefore the vulnerability that many countries and economies are experiencing right now, and particularly those who fall outside the established health coverage systems, who do not have access to internet, who therefore are part of the over 1.4 billion children who currently are not at school. The women who are not able to practice their work in terms of livelihoods. I think the list in terms of informal sector livelihoods could go on. It is an extraordinary time, and I begin by reminding ourselves of the magnitude, because it also was to me brought home by the Human Development Report Office's update just a few days ago, which for the first time in 30 years anticipates a reversal in human development. This is unprecedented, and just another indicator, if we needed one, that this is not just a momentary crisis. This is a crisis that is shaking the foundations of our economies, societies, but also represents a risk of setbacks and certainly of protracted attempts to recover. And this will influence the way we look at what happens next, which is part of my brief presentation to you this morning. But we also meet at the halfway point of UNDP's strategic plan, and therefore a focus of this meeting at your request was to focus on the midterm review and the progress made. We meet just as the decade of action for sustainable development has begun, and we meet 17 months into the UNDS reform process. And I hope that in the remarks that I will be able to make, and with the encouragement of the president of our board, I will not dwell in detail on the results, because we have provided you with detailed documentation. We have my full speech also available online, which obviously covers in more detail what it is that we have implemented over the 2-year period of the strategic plan. We have the midterm review document that was made available already, has been part of a number of informal board meetings, and hopefully is well known to members. Our annual report, which I'm pleased to show you, there is actually a physical version of it as well, but it is online, and try to provide just from last week all of you with an overview of what happened during the past year. And we have also provided you with an update paper on UNDP's contribution and engagement in the UNDS reform process. So these are all givens, and therefore my review of the actual progress will focus on two dimensions. One is the results and how we have performed after the midterm review in terms of results. And secondly, on the other part of the strategic plan, which is the transformation of UNDP, its offer, its transformation as an institution, the focus that you asked us to look at, and the areas in which we have invested to look forward. And if you allow me, President, I will immediately proceed into the development results. Just a snapshot. In the video you saw the magnitude of numbers. It does sometimes surprise me in this global context of how many people we can reach when really the organization is not a major financier of development. But I'm sorry, I just have a little interruption here. Just 1 second, please, President. I just need to turn. My apologies. These are the vagaries when you're operating from a dining table and there is still an entire household operating. So sorry, I continue.
I get it.
You know the feeling. I think everybody can relate to it. And my family has not yet thrown me out, although I have taken occupancy of the dining room and living room for the last, I don't know, 100 and something days. 48 million people had better access to basic services, 28 million voters registered, of whom very reassuringly 48% were women. UNDP actively engaged in supporting countries, over 50 countries, in establishing and reinforcing strong human rights systems. The climate promise exceeding our expectation, with over 110 countries now engaged in working towards, even though the UNFPA conference of the parties is postponed, a review and revision of their nationally determined contributions and national climate strategies. We have seen governance, which has always been at the core of UNDP's work in terms of how countries wish to use UNDP, remain and in fact grow to be the single largest area of investment for UNDP, 40% of our portfolio. But interesting enough, I also want to emphasize, by demand from program countries as much as by demand from those who are financing UNDP's work in terms of the donor community, because 25% of that investment is actually coming from the program countries themselves, and therefore a good indicator of the centrality of this work for us. Our focus on gender, and I won't repeat any numbers, but we have made significant progress and are amongst the best performing UN entities in the UN Women-led SWOP assessment. And I think you will probably have seen in our documents and in our report on gender that we have invested significantly across all aspects of UNDP's work. A gender-balanced senior leadership team, a gender-balanced cohort of resident representatives, a gender-balanced cohort of deputy resident representatives, all this achieved in less than 18 months. And I think a significant step forward, as much as we also are concentrating on the development work of UNDP in terms of gender, reviewing our approaches in both poverty eradication, social protection, and gender-based violence, which obviously in this particular moment has, through the work and the analysis of our sister agencies, UN Women, UNFPA, taken on another central focus. We also work very often as an enabler, and I think the area where this is most obvious is in the vertical funds, where we supported countries to access over 1 billion in vertical funds to tackle climate change and other sustainable development priorities, in addition to which supporting them in leveraging another $1.2 billion in private and public finance across 91 countries. This is a magnitude of what I often say, UNDP and the funding for UNDP is about helping countries to leverage financing and investment. And I think that equation is something we need to document and demonstrate far more clearly. The value of our signature solutions is unlocked by integration. It's a word that has been used and invoked many times. And I continue to say that integration at the end of the day is the difference between trying to tackle issues by sectoral approaches or by accepting that we operate within systems, social systems, economic systems, a government system. And UNDP's approach, for example, is to look at the informal sector, to look at the economy of the poor, to look at exclusion, And these are the kinds of tools where the signature solutions become drivers for integrated responses as opposed to sectoral responses. And it is ultimately mirroring the task of government, whether in the executive, in parliament, or the judiciary, to provide the kind of government institutions that societies are calling for. In terms of our partnership survey, which we just concluded a few months ago, I was very reassured because 80% of partners consider UNDP to be a valuable partner. And I think this is important because this is a survey with over 3,000 respondents. Many of them obviously being hopefully good partners will not say that we're a bad partner, but still it's a critical mass of feedback independently undertaken by a company and carries within it also aspects where we are not performing so well, where partners want to see the instruments of UNDP evolve. You had also asked us to increase the engagement with IFIs, and I'm pleased to report that UNDP and international financial institutions engagement has increased by 50% compared to the previous biennium. And we have also invested heavily in the collaboration with OCHA to strengthen our work in terms of the humanitarian development collaboration. And a good example is how we are collaborating in strengthening resilience in the Lake Chad Basin with our work with WHO and the UN Development System agencies right now. There are so many results. I hope that this is just an indication of, I think, the basic evidence that we provide to you that when you look at the strategic plan and the midterm review, in terms of development, results, and delivery, we are on track. But perhaps the more complex and challenging task in the last 2 years was also to drive the transformation of UNDP, of its offer and its ability to work within the UN development system and indeed the UN family as a whole under both the objectives of UN reform, but also, and I think principally driven in terms of substance, by where the future of development is evolving. What are the challenges that countries face? What is the role of a development program of the United Nations in the year 2020 or 2025 in terms of being a partner to countries in addressing their development choices and pathways? We have, after a great deal of work, labeled this really the next generation UNDP, next gen UNDP as we refer to it. And it is not just a slogan that emerged overnight. It is driven by the priorities set out in the strategic plan, but brought to life by a very deliberate set of intensive re-engineering efforts within UNDP and with our partners to push, as we said in last year's report, the boundaries of how we think, how we deliver, how we invest, and how we manage. And I think the one reassuring aspect in an otherwise very traumatizing period has been to see how these investments in the response that UNDP was able to mobilize immediately when COVID-19 hit us has been evidence of some of the value already being realized of these investments. We have gone through an intense period of UN reform, and yet we're able to establish UNDP's financial stability, always a challenge, but you will remember that at the beginning of this strategic planning period, we had significantly drawn down on the reserves because of deficits. The last 2 years have been without deficit, and we have taken many steps to make UNDP nimbler and more responsive, more efficient, and more effective. And the latest numbers where we are able to spend 91 cents in the dollar on programs, up from 88 in 2018, is yet another illustration of how these efforts are beginning to pay off. But we have invested also significantly in transforming that development offer. The investment in the accelerator lab networks that in less than 8 months, we stood up in 60 countries, covering in fact 78 countries. UNDP's creativity has been enhanced in sourcing local solutions to tackle the complexity of development far more from within countries, from within the ingenuity of both innovation in government, but also innovation in the private sector, in startup communities, and with institutions within the country and communities. We have invested heavily in transforming the knowledge functions of UNDP through the establishment of the Global Policy Network as a driving concept, whereby we now try to connect remotely the 8,800 specialists across the organization. And indeed, it has become a magnet for 5,000 other experts who we often work with and who are part of this Global Policy Network. We are investing significantly and deliberately in making UNDP an institution that in the future can access best practice, knowledge, and expertise across its entire organization in real time, in order to make that value of UNDP as a development learning network and resource of best practices available to every country. Our investments in a digital UNDP have been significant. It's perhaps the most forward-looking investment we make in terms of driving UNDP into the frontier of where digital possibilities emerge, both as an organization operationally, but also in terms of digitalization in development. And I think we have seen just in the last few weeks the extraordinary spectacle of the future of digitalization literally being brought forward by 5 or 10 years in many country contexts, in many institutional contexts. And UNDP has been very much at the center of helping countries to leverage and also to take advantage of these opportunities. We invested in a new People for 2030 strategy, our human resource development strategy, because the people that UNDP is able to attract, to retain, but also how we develop their skills, how we evolve their capacity to be at the frontier of development thinking is critical. And that strategy is now in full implementation on 9 tracks. We just also approved an IT investment strategy because equally UNDP's IT infrastructure, its ERP with which it manages itself, are critical components of a modern, efficient, effective and transparent organization, and yet another major investment in transforming UNDP. But these are sort of some of the more inward-looking parts to make UNDP be an institution that rises to the objectives of the strategic plan. But there are also examples such as the newly conceived Human Development Report focus. Under the leadership of our colleague Pedro Conceição, the Human Development Report Office published in 2019 what has been a widely recognized significant report on inequality. And as you probably recall, this theme will be part of a trilogy for 3 years, but with different other elements being introduced. And this year, we will focus on the link of inequality and nature and environment sustainability, because in fact, that relationship is at the heart also of the 2030 agenda and the future of many economies. We invested in a new crisis bureau. We are invested heavily as an organization in fragile and crisis affected countries. 9 of our 10 largest programs today are in fact in those countries. And UNDP continues to be the principal provider of support and partnership to the Peace Building Fund and also to the Office for Counterterrorism in terms of preventing violent extremism. It speaks to the synergy and the strength of UNDP's presence on the ground. Finally, just another indication of the transformation in the context of the UN development system with the delinking of the Resident Coordinator's Office, the establishment of DCO. There is still a significant reliance on providing services to this infrastructure. And I'm pleased to report that UNDP in a rating received a 73% satisfied rating from UNDP's support to RCs. That was part of our partnership survey, so the larger population watching us. But we also introduced something that many of you may be familiar with from using an Uber, which is a rating system of every single service action. As you commission UNDP to undertake a service action, you can provide a rating. Over the last 17 months, we have received 19,000 service requests, and the RC system as a user has rated UNDP on average at 4.24 out of 5 stars, just as another evidence that in this transition, much of what was necessary to keep the RC offices moving forward has actually been working quite well. President, let me move my focus to the steps that will follow. Clearly in the MTR, we identified a number of areas that need more attention, and I will not take your time this morning in detail, but from the beginning, I was keen that this strategic plan will be judged by whether it was reform ready, because we had to approve it, as you recall, before the reform resolution was passed in the General Assembly, and future focused. I think on these 2 fronts, we have made significant progress, but as always, we still are identifying areas where we are struggling perhaps to make progress fast enough, or we are still trying to discover how an institution like UNDP can move forward. We had a significant discussion with you around poverty eradication based on an evaluation, and I'm very proud of our independent evaluation office because it is an integral part of enabling you and us to look at where we need to evolve. I think our dialogue with you was a good example of how we are now investing and strengthening our focus on multidimensional poverty and reorienting our approach also to social protection, which clearly has emerged not only with COVID, but in fact in the lead up to COVID already as key areas of priority. We have, as I mentioned, invested significantly in the global policy network, but we are still struggling on how to make this work in an organization that is 89% project-based funding. So our expertise is not fungible in the sense that you can take the best person on social protection from one country and make them available to another team, because we need to find ways in which we can use that expertise while not breaking our commitments and contractual obligations. So we have had some delays in moving forward what is essentially a new digital platform internally in UNDP to use those 8,800 experts. We are engaged in heavy efforts to cluster services also, and again, the rules within the UN in terms of staffing rules, contractual rules, have slowed us down on some fronts, but actually I must commend also our staff because they have been incredibly willing to buy into this transformation of the organization, and we have foreshadowed and envisaged significant cost reductions as a result of these investments. President, let me end by just drawing, let's say, a couple of conclusions out of what we observed, both from the MTR that I've tried to briefly present to you in the strategic plan and our performance, and the moment in time in which we find ourselves, the here and now. This is a COVID-19 moment, and there is no doubt that it will shape what we will have to respond to in the next or the remaining period of the strategic plan. But I'm convinced that in the way that our UNDP COVID-19 offer that we launched in March and that immediately responded to a quick capacity to assist countries, over 100 were reached in less than 8 weeks with specific grants that we released, allows us also to draw attention to the integration function of UNDP, the Build Back Better priority that everybody is invoking. And therefore, as I look forward to the next few months, I believe that we are one of the institutions that must be at the heart of both adjusting to the COVID-19 challenge of our countries with whom we work, but also be an anchor that maintains the compass of the 2030 agenda and the SDGs firmly on the radar of countries, but also the international community. And I would suggest that 4 areas based on the demand that we have identified in the last 3 months have emerged around which I think much of what we do can be very well captured. One is clearly governance, the role of the state vis-à-vis its citizens, the markets, the private sector, the ability of maintaining business continuity in government, but also the rule of law, human rights in the midst of these very turmoil-like situations, economic recovery strategies that can navigate the dilemmas that countries now face in terms of the mitigation measures, saving corporate entities from going bankrupt, investing in mitigation measures, cash transfer programs for informal sector workers who no longer have the ability to earn a living. This is a complex moment in which governments have to make terrible choices, if you want, and are faced with enormous fiscal constraints. We are in the midst of also deploying the integrated national financing framework support, which again, in over 50 countries in the next few months, will assist countries in actually trying to address these issues from the perspective of the choices governments must make. And here, let me make a reference to the Secretary General's request for UNDP to take the technical lead role within the UN country teams and with the resident coordinator in the socioeconomic response that we are supporting. I mentioned yesterday briefly, already in 63 countries, the first products have been prepared with UN country teams, with our counterpart governments. There are also 5 initial socioeconomic assessments on a regional basis. We are working with the whole UN family, with DCO and the resident coordinators who have the lead role in terms of COVID-19 response. And I hope that this will be a significant contribution, both to having a joined up response of the UN family, but also very much supporting governments in their choices. The second major area, social protection and uprooting inequalities. We clearly have to assist governments right now and for the foreseeable future in addressing the cash transfer programs, identifying the vulnerable, gender disaggregated data, disability, rural, urban. How are we able to support governments in putting the kind of social mitigation measures, social safety nets, but also programs in place that address gender-based violence, drive forward the digital reach of temporary basic incomes, universal basic incomes perhaps as one of the outcomes that countries will wish to consider. And how do we also bring into the national debate the Build Back Better view of what could happen next, the future of work, the future of digital connectivity in education, in business, and the role of, again, the private sector with governments acting here. We are working very closely with a number of agencies, ILO, UN Women, UNICEF, UNFPA, United Nations Volunteers, the United Nations Capital Development Fund, precisely in looking at how UNDP can ideally provide the expertise and also help leverage the UN collective expertise to assist countries. The third area, green economy. There is no question that wherever you look in the world right now, governments are looking for opportunities to invest in a more resilient, more sustainable, more low carbon future economy. I think UNDP's significant portfolio in this area provides an excellent foundation upon which we can work with UNEP, with FAO, with DESA, and also the international financial institutions in addressing the designing and de-risking of nature-based solutions, agriculture and food systems with FAO, because this is part of the NDC work that we're already doing with FAO, climate change, investments in energy, drawing also on the analysis and the partnership that we have developed with IRENA in terms of helping countries to access investment, but also develop their renewable energy strategies. And finally, the fourth area along governance, social protection, and green economy will be digital disruption and innovation. This is both an opportunity, and we all know that in just a few weeks, countries have had to scramble across the world to be able to take advantage of the possibilities, but also to address perhaps the deficits in not having invested sufficiently in it. School children out of education, health systems functioning, governments being able to operate. For instance, in these first few weeks, over 40 governments requested UNDP support to keeping their public services going as the pandemic began. This has to do with health centers, central government, local government, Zoom licenses for parliament committees to meet to authorize budgets, cabinets, and situation rooms in the executive. It is a fascinating spread and scope of activity, but it is also about trying to understand how not only we get children back into education, how we may be able to connect schools. And here I want to mention UNICEF also with their GIGA initiative. We are partnering with UNICEF very much and UNESCO in this effort to understand, could $100 billion be a shortcut to connecting virtually all schools to the internet in the next couple of years, to both address the extraordinarily painful situation of children who are simply out of education now, but also the future of education. And at the same time, there are also issues of privacy, of human rights that are arising in this very rapid spread of internet access and the use of digital information, of tracing and tracking. These are all areas that intersect with governance, with social protection, and speak again to UNDP's core DNA of being an integrator, being able to connect these different spheres. President, I end by just quoting Amartya Sen, who inspired the Human Development Report and whose thinking and teachings, I think, remain so relevant to our appreciation of human development, of human security, and the future of development. And he said, while we cannot live without history, we need not live within it either. And that is very much the mantra that I hope we as UNDP can, as part of the UN system, bring to this extraordinary moment, but also with a strong view and commitment to maintaining a focus on the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. We were not a healthy set of global societies and economies before the pandemic. The pandemic has amplified, has reminded us of our Achilles heels. I think in the future of development, in the SDGs, lie much of what countries will hold on to as they chart their way forward. And my last remark is simply to thank you, President, the Bureau, the board members, our partners, our funders, and our sister agencies, as well as my staff. At this moment, with all of you, with all of them, and with the teams of UNDP fully deployed across the world, we are part of what multilateralism stands for and what the United Nations, I hope, will be recognized and remembered for in this moment of crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator Steiner, for your presentation. Very informative and interesting as always. Before I open the floor, I would like to remind delegates that as usual in this virtual modalities of this session, questions and interventions will be limited to 2 minutes. At the end of that time, I will ask you to end or close. And this is 2 minutes for individual interventions and 4 minutes for group interventions. While again, we do not have a timer to give you a pre-warning, at the end or very close to your time, I will ask you to wrap up, please. Again, I thank Mr. Steiner, and I will now open the floor to delegations for questions and comments. We will begin with the permanent representative of Guyana, Ambassador Michael Tampao, speaking on behalf of the group of G77 and China. Excellency, you have the floor, please.
I thank you very much, Mr. President. I apologize on behalf of Ambassador Tenpa, who is unavoidably absent and has asked me to deliver this statement on his behalf and on behalf of the group. Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. The group congratulates you and other members of the Bureau on your leadership of the work of the Executive Board, particularly during these tumultuous times. The group wishes to thank the UNDP Administrator, Mr. Akim Steiner, for the report on the work of the organization. We note UNDP's engagement in supporting the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, in particular, to kickstart the decade of action and delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. We reiterate our endorsement of UNDP's core mandate in supporting national efforts to achieve the SDGs and in line with national priorities. The COVID-19 pandemic will undoubtedly reverse the development gains achieved over the past decades. It has already exacerbated existing inequalities and vulnerabilities, with its disproportionate impacts on the poor and vulnerable. The group underscores UNDP's flexibility as part of the system-wide response in assisting developing countries to deal with the human aspects of the response and to recover from the pandemic in a more resilient way. Mr. President, one of our undeniable common and overarching objectives is to eradicate poverty in all its forms and dimensions. This is also one of the greatest global challenges and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. It must be kept fully in focus while addressing the interconnected nature of all SDGs. For our group, the 2030 Agenda requires an integrated approach and collective action at all levels, particularly as we grapple with responding to the current crisis and its consequences. In this regard, UNDP has a central role in assisting developing countries to strengthen our policymaking and institutional capacity. We deeply acknowledge the support that UNDP provides through the repositioned United Nations Development System. We call on UNDP to continue to coordinate its development work within the UN system, while taking into account the interlinkages between sustainable development, humanitarian action, and peace-building activities in accordance with the mandates of the QCPR guidance, as reaffirmed in GA Resolution 72/279 on the UNDS repositioning. We note the progress made in implementing UNDP's Strategic Plan 2018 to 2021 and urge UNDP to build on the lessons learned during the first half of its implementation, as well as in addressing the current COVID-19 impacts. The Group of 77 and China reaffirms the importance of sufficient and predictable core resources for development activities as the key to achieving the 2030 agenda. It is critical that UNDP and other entities be given the ability to respond to the rapidly changing development conditions, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, the group stresses the need to increase ODA allocations to developing countries by meeting ODA commitments. A final word, Mr. President, on the importance our group attaches to South-South cooperation, and particularly to the role of the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. We stand firm in reasserting its mandate in advancing and coordinating South-South cooperation activities globally and across the UN system.
You gotta wrap up.
We reiterate the commitments enshrined in the BAPA Plus 40 outcomes adopted by the UN General Assembly, noting that South-South cooperation is not a substitute for, but rather a complement to North-South cooperation. In this regard, priorities for the UNOPS must be set by countries of the South, guided by the principles of respect for national sovereignty, national ownership and independence, equality, non-conditionality, non-interference in domestic affairs, and mutual benefit. We further reiterate the call of the group for the strengthening of the UNOPS, aiming to bring South-South and triangular cooperation to support the efforts of member states to eradicate poverty in all its forms. The group looks forward to constructive discussions. In closing, Mr. President, please accept our best wishes for a successful presidency. I thank you.
Thank you. I thank the delegate, the distinguished delegate of Guyana, speaking on behalf of the group of 77. I once again appeal for time and will ask people to cut at the appropriate time given. Thank you very much, Guyana. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Malawi, speaking on behalf of the LDCs. Ambassador, Excellency, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President, for the way you conduct ably this meeting and the board. I have the honor to deliver these remarks on behalf of the least developed countries, and I align my statement to the remarks made by Guyana on behalf of the group of 77 and China. We would also like to thank Mr. Steiner and the entire staff of the UNDP Global, Regional and National for their extensive work and efforts in advancing UN reform and the Sustainable Development Agenda, response to COVID-19, as well as for their prioritization of LDCs, LLDCs, and SEEDs in their work. Mr. President, we welcome the UNDP's 2019 annual report, which highlights the realities of development prior to COVID-19 and the realities we are facing now with the pandemic. We agree with the perspective of the report that COVID-19 has not become a challenge in a vacuum, but rather has exacerbated pre-existing challenges and will negatively impact development gains and progress in all developing countries and in LDCs in particular. The LDCs reiterate the importance of UN reform and commend the leadership role of the DSG. The group also commends UNDP for undertaking various reform measures to make it fit for the purpose. As expressed at the operational activities segment, the LDCs recognize the importance of a UN that is adaptable and responsive to new and emerging challenges, as evidenced by the COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, we look forward to the UNDP's continued role in rolling out the reform as well as providing feedback. As indicated previously, we welcome the UNDP's recognition of the unique development context of our group of countries, as well as the LLDCs and SEEDs in its operation, and we look forward to its scaled up support, especially under the certain global context, in order to ensure that LDCs are not left behind as we move into the decade of action. We look forward to continued coordination vertically and horizontally within the UNDP and between the UNDP and the UNDS. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is on its final countdown. The focus of the strategic plan of the UNDP is still highly relevant, even in post-COVID regime. We want to thank the UNDP for its initiative to partner with IRENA to assist LDCs in the review of their NDCs. We note that millions of additional people are being pushed into poverty and hunger. UNDP will have to provide additional focus to LDCs in addressing poverty and building resilience as they are being disproportionately affected by the pandemic. UNDP also needs to reorient its business model to contribute to building better, greener, and resilient societies after COVID-19. Mr. President, we remain committed to sustainable development and to working closely with the UNDP and the entire UN system as a whole. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, and thank you for keeping within the time. I now give the floor to the representative of Antigua and Barbuda, speaking on behalf of CARICOM. You have the floor, Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Administrator, Executive Board members, Excellencies and colleagues. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the 40 member states of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. The group wishes to thank Administrator Steiner and his team for a very thought-provoking assessment of UNDP throughout the year. The report and other related documents provides useful information for engagement here today. We also wish to align our statement with that of delivered by Guyana on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. CARICOM commends UNDP for the agency's proactive engagement with the region during this COVID-19 pandemic. It really brings to light the commitment to ensuring no one is left behind. The pandemic also highlights the true vulnerability of our sub-region, whether it be vulnerability based on environmental factors or external shocks. The respective governments of CARICOM countries are facing a momentous task ahead, which includes preventing social hemorrhaging, economic freefall, and the further decline of the health and well-being of CARICOM citizens. We recognize that we are not in this fight alone. What is evident is that this crisis has struck a truly integrated global community, and therefore it will take global efforts to repeal some of the negative effects from COVID-19. UNDP should truly be center at these efforts, and in some instances, the bridge that connects program countries to the availability of resources, and also acts as the anchor for the implementation of much of the development-related recovery efforts, with poverty alleviation at the center of this mandate. Long before this pandemic, CARICOM has always called for the international community to provide the physical and monetary solutions necessary to manage the magnitude of external shocks and address the multiplicity of complex developmental challenges that we face as small island developing states. We have also called upon UNDP to continue to be an ally in this call, and also for the creation and utilization of certain vulnerability indexes that would address our designation as middle and high income countries. Much of the relief efforts by the World Bank and IMF are not accessible to a host of CARICOM countries based on such erroneous designation. The Executive Board of UNDP must join in this fight from an agency perspective. This would mean a reversal of trends to support non-core activities and to truly fund core activities, which then would allow UNDP the necessary flexibility to respond to the needs of program countries. Core resources are vital to these efforts. Within this effort, and as reflected within UNDS reform and the funding compact, UNDP must continue to broaden its funding base, target new partnerships, and continue to implement new directions in resource mobilization while at the same time ensuring full transparency and accountability. Mr. President, we are at a very important moment for all of the UN funds and agencies, and in particular, a crucial moment for UNDP. The UN Development System was redesigned to better service developing countries. Resolution 71/243 on the QCPR of the United Nations Operational Activities for Development gave clear mandates by member states in making the development architecture more fit for purpose and better positioned to support countries in their efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, also achieving the SDGs, and in the case of SIDS, the full realization of the Small Pathway. The strategic plan of the organization must now take into account present-day realities, and the discussions later this year on the new QCPR will provide the necessary frameworks to advance these discussions. Mr. President, we have concluded the review of the multi-country officers, a review that was long overdue and consultations that were at times painstaking. However, we wish to commend the RCs within our region on being engaged with our respective governments and offering coordination assistance in moving critical needs within our respective countries as a response to the pandemic. The RRs are also vital within these efforts, and we continue to call on UNDP to ensure gender balance and regional representations within its selection processes. In the interest of time, and to be brief in my conclusion, Mr. President and Administrator, it would be remiss of me not to touch on another reality for our region. And as if things could not be worse, we are at the start of the official hurricane season for the Caribbean region, a season that is predicted to be once again highly active. Our plea is simple to UNDP. Please be ready in the event our region needs you, and this includes having critical supplies within our region in order to respond effectively. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Antigua and Barbuda for his statement speaking on behalf of the member countries of CARICOM. The next two speakers will be the permanent representative of Sweden and the permanent representative of Rwanda, speaking on behalf of groups. We would have both speakers make their presentation, after which I will ask Mr. Steiner and his team to respond. We will now hear from the permanent representative of Sweden, who will be followed by the permanent representative of Rwanda. Excellency, you have the floor, please.
President, thank you so much, and appreciation to Achim Steiner for his very substantive statement. I make this statement on behalf of Australia, Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Canada, Denmark, the European Union as a donor, Italy, Ireland, Japan, Kuwait, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and my own country, Sweden. To keep with the format of this session, I will deliver a short version of this joint statement. I kindly ask UNDP and delegates to please also take note of the full version uploaded on the PaperSmart system. This is a COVID-19 moment, as Achim Steiner said. The pandemic sees no border. It has and will continue to have serious long-term impact on communities and people around the world. For the first time since the concept of human development was introduced in 1990, we now risk to see a decline. This is one of the most challenging situations we have been in since the UN was founded 75 years ago. And we will continue to live with its consequences for a long time to come. We agree with Achim Steiner that UNDP's role in socioeconomic recovery and response is key. We encourage UNDP to continue to work closely with development partners in and beyond the UN system, with the aim to ensure an overall global response that is strategic and focused. A coherent and coordinated response from the entire multilateral system is now more important than ever. Strong leadership and coordination by the United Nations is essential. We welcome the UN framework for the immediate socio-economic response to the COVID-19 and the swift startup of the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund. We strongly support UNDP as the agency technically leading the socio-economic response and recovery efforts of the UN, and recognize your unique position to advance the UN development system efforts to support societies in building back better and greener. While we now rightly focus on the immediate response, we should seize the opportunity to lay the foundation for a more sustainable, inclusive, and equal world, with better preparedness for new challenges and crises. It is fundamental to continue with a broad development agenda, as well as to manage the socioeconomic efforts of the crisis, in particular for the poorest and most vulnerable countries and individuals. This includes support to strengthening human rights and democracy, gender equality, climate action, opportunity for decent work, social protection and education, as well as maintaining free trade and flow of goods globally. We applaud the leadership of the Secretary General and the DSG and endorse their approach to ensure that recovery strategies keep us on track towards Agenda 2030 and the goals of the Paris Agreement. Building a sustainable and inclusive future. A green recovery will help to reshape our economies based on our responsibility to future generations. Reconstruction and recovery efforts must be gender responsive and attention in particularly given to persons in vulnerable situations to ensure that no one is left behind. Gender inequalities have been exacerbated by COVID-19. Building back better means also building back gender equal and empowering women and girls. We support UNDP's strong focus on poor social protection systems and social services to ensure that no one is left behind, as well as the increasing opportunities for jobs and livelihood, particularly for women and youth. We also expect the UNDP to promote gender equality, disability inclusion, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and promote a culture free of corruption and abuse of power. Building back better also means building back greener. This will require taking transformative action and adapting our societies. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Sweden. Rwanda, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of Albania, Australia, Austria, Antigua and Barbuda, Belgium, Bulgaria, Botswana, Canada, Denmark, Djibouti, the European Union as a donor, Finland, France, Japan, Luxembourg, Mexico, the Netherlands, New Zealand, North Macedonia, Norway, Republic of Korea, Romania, the USA, and my own country, Rwanda. Thank you very much, Mr. Steiner, for his presentation, for its strong commitment to gender equality and throughout all strands of UNDP's work. Leadership makes all the difference. We thank Mrs. Laguna, and the gender crisis adds to the burden of those already deprived. Across any crisis also comes with opportunities. He is in a position to shift towards transition on equal terms in the important to build back better. We expect that all use data disaggregated by gender and the SDGs. UNDP also needs to grasp equality and women's empowerment require forces to push back deepening inequality, curb rising levels of gender-based violence and sexuality strategy in 2019, and areas for improvement. Yes, more than in others. We are encouraged by the notable progress in organizational change across its offices. We are also pleased to see the number of offices having gender equality strategies. We look to UNDP to continue this trend and to further improve that a significant number of UNDP seeing gender gaps. In this regard, as well as more time and investment for achieving greater results on gender equality, and we encourage UNDP and member states to take action to reach the gender equality strategy funding. Some efforts to strengthen results in crisis prevention and management. We expect a steep increase in the number of country offices reporting on promoting women's leadership in crisis recovery mechanism, up from the very modest 4 units only that reported in the MTR. Finally, let me conclude by encouraging UNDP to fully incorporate the important lessons learned from the MTR during the remaining strategic plan period. And for human rights, there is also overwhelming evidence that it benefits societies as a whole. Closing the gender gap has positive impact on economic growth, health, education, and sustained peace. Building back better means building back gender equal, empowering women and girls. Many are hoping for a return to normal after the pandemic, but we cannot afford and should not accept to return to a normal of multifaceted structural and institutionalized gender discrimination.
You have to wrap up, Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much. That's the end, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting, but we are running a little bit around overtime. Thank you so much. We were going to now, we missed our colleague from Italy wanted to make a statement, but I understand she had to leave. We were going to give her the floor just before we ask Mr. Steiner. So we will now ask Mr. Steiner and his team to respond to the set of questions and comments. And if we
Mr. President, I'm here.
Oh, you are? I'm terribly sorry.
Yes. No, it's my fault because I thought I still have a couple of minutes. So if I can take the floor, it would be my pleasure to do it.
Yes, please, Ambassador. Excellency, please do.
Thank you so much, and thank you for giving this opportunity. I really wanted to say how much we appreciate the work that UNDP is doing, to commend really the work normally done, but also the response in these very challenging times. And I want to really recognize the leadership of Achim Steiner. Is really a very good job done. I have a question more than a statement. As you can see, Italy was associated also to these previous 2 very important statements. And my question is really on digitalization, and really to ask the administrator, how do you plan to effectively harness the power of digital technology, both inside UNDP to further streamline internal procedures, to consolidate the gain achieved, but also externally with a particular focus on digital finance to provide service to the agencies and to the member states, as well as to better interact with the private sector. And I come from a conversation also with Peter Maurer of ICRC, and he was underlining also how much these digital way of working that we are now using because we are obliged to, has to be seen also positively, and how in reality virtualization has brought, for instance, in the work of the ICRC, but I have to say also in our work, and so I'm wondering if for UNDP is the same, some advantages. There are things that are happening also through digital working, and in our diplomatic activity, in our negotiation activity, there are positive things that are happening. And so my question is also how digitalization could maybe improve, Achim, the work of the organization in areas where sometimes is really challenging to find your ways. And thank you again. And thank you, President.
Thank you, Ambassador. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Indeed. So I will now ask the administrator and his team to respond to the questions and comments made. Achim, you and your team, please.
Thank you so much, President. First of all, let me thank all of you for these statements. And I think in large part, I think we can respond to them by saying we are fully aligned with the calls that you are making. I mean, let me begin with a statement by the G77. We remain, as I said in our statement, fully focused on the fact that in helping and assisting countries managing the pandemic, we are extremely conscious that this is not only a health systems phenomenon, it is a deeply social and a deeply economic phenomenon that needs to be addressed. And within that, the focus on poverty eradication, on inequality, but also, as the distinguished representative of Guyana said, the integrated approach that is required in addressing this are very much the focus of how we are trying to deploy UNDP right now. And we will certainly keep the focus on the eradication of poverty because tragically, we already know that the number of poor people will grow exponentially over the next few months. And this is existential realities in the millions. So hopefully it will be, let's say, something that can be quickly reversed for those who are falling into poverty in the free fall economic situation right now. But we know that this is going to be an extraordinary challenge for governments, for countries in terms of fiscal space that they have available, but also for the ability to identify who are the most vulnerable here. And I also want to just acknowledge that gender disaggregated data, as the ambassador of Rwanda referred to, is very much part of our effort to help countries, but also to be able to bring the latest digital technologies. We are able to bring new ways, also using artificial intelligence, where census-based data, the old mechanical way of establishing gender disaggregated data, as we know, is very incomplete, imperfect in many countries. So we are looking at new opportunities also to overcome that. And UN Women obviously is our compass here. And I want to thank Pomzile because time and again, she has been part also of precisely driving that frontier in the practice and the partnerships that we have. Perhaps a brief remark just on the funding also. I did not say much about funding in my remarks because it's in the reports, but quite clearly three things are in a sense worth mentioning here. One, in terms of the strategic plan, we met 95% of the target in terms of core funding. UNDP has reversed, I would say, and I say tentatively, a decade-long trend in declining core financing. We took a realistic target in the strategic plan, although frankly speaking, we should have a more ambitious one, but realism is part of managing an organization. And I'm pleased to say that I see, first of all, no longer a decline in core funding. It stabilized last year, and in fact, it is beginning to increase. And if exchange rates had not moved in a negative way because of the way our donor core funding is constituted, we would actually have seen an overperformance in terms of the target. But simply the last year lost us probably somewhere in the range of $20 to $30 million, simply because of exchange rate changes. There were countries that actually increased their core funding to UNDP, but registering in dollars, it doesn't necessarily show. So I mention this because core funding is so central, first of all, to maintain the multilateral character of UNDP also. I think this is something we often forget. A United Nations Development Program is precisely not a bilateral entity because it is funded by the community of nations. And that is as a matter of principle, and the donor funding compact also acknowledges and recognizes that, and we have to jointly work on that. But clearly core funding, and this is interesting in the midterm review and the artificial intelligence we now have also deployed to look at correlations, clearly where we're able to deploy core resources in offices we can detect, and also in programmatic interventions, better and more effective implementation. I don't have the time to go into the details here, but there is a, just efficiency and effectiveness argument also to be made here, in addition to making an organization more manageable in terms of its mandate. So I thank the G77 for its reminder that sufficient and predictable core resources are critical, and I encourage also those of you who look to UNDP as an institution in which you are willing to invest in the spirit of a United Nations Development Program, core financing, but also thematic programmatic financing is another form of strategic, more flexible funding, as well as multi-year funding. This institution, in a sense, is an extraordinarily vulnerable entity when you think that really it has no guaranteed funding. There's no assessed contribution. So this whole edifice is a remarkable expression of confidence year by year. And I think at least in the core funding, thematic funding, and flexible funding, we look to you to continue to work and walk with us the way. To Ambassador Pax-Lagoya and the statement on behalf of LDCs, let me absolutely agree with the priority that you have set. You refer to UN reform as also looking to UNDP as being an integral part of rolling it out. I just want to refer you to the paper that we provided. I believe UNDP in that paper laid out the significance of its efforts over the last 2 years in supporting the rollout of UNDS reform, and whether it is in the backbone, in the administrative and the servicing as the largest single contributor to the agency funds that are being provided to the resident coordinator system, as much as in the programmatic work that we do. And I think the socioeconomic response right now clearly is going to put a lot more focus on how RC and RR can together reinforce each other's capacity to support the UN country team. 60% of our program resources go to LDCs. I always wish to remind the board of that, because it is a very explicit commitment that you as a board and we as an institution in the way we manage resources and the program remain fully committed to. And certainly the reference to IRENA is highly welcome. In fact, I jointly published a paper with Francesco La Camera just a few weeks ago, where we congratulated IRENA on its new report and are part of the climate investment platform, very much the core partners with the Green Climate Fund in putting attention on a massive opportunity in investment. Africa in particular, and my colleague, the ambassador of Rwanda, but all of you know that on that continent, in the next year or two, we could see an extraordinary surge in investment in renewable energy, off-grid and on-grid. It is the biggest stimulus for the poor, the rural economy, for the 600 or so million people who have no access to electricity today. It could connect both the COVID-19 response and an economic transformation and a green low carbon transition path for Africa. It is absurd, if I may use that word in inverted commas for a moment, when we think back to how we struggled on the $100 billion of climate finance that we have been struggling internationally to mobilize. When we actually look at the opportunities that exist for transformation in the context of the kind of investments that are currently being envisaged by countries. So just to Perks, thank you very much for raising that. To the distinguished representative of Antigua and Barbuda and the CARICOM statement, let me just emphasize, we began a year ago to develop a SIDS offer in UNDP. As you know, it is premised particularly on the blue economy, on climate change and digital transformation. I think in some ways it is a prophetic view of where SIDS both have the greatest risks right now, but also the greatest opportunities. And we are fully committed, as we were in the MCO review, as we are in the presence that we have in small island developing states, but also in the way that we are investing in partnerships with SIDS to continue to deepen that. We are conscious of the fact that UNDP is one of the principal UN entities that is a partner to SIDS in a very practical, in a presence-based way. And therefore, we will continue to drive and hopefully have the support also of those who fund our work to do this. And yeah, let me mention this middle income status is a real challenge because, as we know, the hurricane season is about to start. The last one is only 12 months ago. We saw entire economies destroyed. We have to get out of this, the vulnerability lens on trying to determine how the international community works with a country affected by these crises has to become a way in which we compensate for this very blunt per capita GDP threshold instrument that simply is unjust and unrealistic in the way that it actually captures the vulnerability of countries. We have, in the last few weeks, just in the Caribbean, deployed out of the 30 million that we have globally, 1.2 million in the rapid response facility, precisely to help with COVID response, but it is also in part to look at the resilience in terms of vulnerability with the hurricane season just around the corner. So I can really say, hand on my heart, we are focused on how we can broaden UNDP's capacity to assist SIDS, because we see an extraordinary need for the international community to recognize this and to show some creative flexibility in the way that we work with these international instruments. To Sweden and the comments that you made, Ambassador, I can only wholeheartedly embrace them. I hope my presentation, the documents that we have provided to you, the outlook that I shared with you also where UNDP in the context of COVID-19, but still maintaining the focus on what the SDGs and the 2030 agenda give to us as a compass, governance, social protection in that context in which I described it, the green economy opportunities and digital disruption innovation, I think are 4 areas around which we are precisely trying to make the best of a portfolio of projects and commitments that we have already, the willingness of donors to reprogram parts of it, and to provide an integrated focus to where countries' demand right now is the driving force. We have to listen to the prime ministers, to our counterparts on where they are setting priorities in this free fall that they're going through. And I believe from the 63 socioeconomic surveys that we have analyzed, the initial ones, the responses, the demand profile that we are observing, these 4 areas capture both the capacity of UNDP, but also the demand right now around which to respond. And on gender, I mean, just to come back to that topic, Ambassador, I thank you for your statement and the countries that have made it. I can only say that in UNDP, I think we have no temptation to be complacent because we recognize the situation together with our sister agencies, UN Women, UNFPA, UNICEF, but also ILO when it comes to labor markets, OHCHR. We are fully conscious of the urgency and the priorities that you have laid out. And while recognizing that we, yes, still have a number of programs that have to, as you said, country offices or also technical programs to fully integrate the gender aspiration and ambition that we have defined, I would say that overall, I hope you recognize that the progress is very encouraging. And I think it is something that should give you confidence, but it is in no way interpreted by us and my senior leadership team, as you know, majority women. So there is no rest here for any male complacency. We are very much focused on how, in the context of national countries' priorities, I mean, we always have to come back to the fact that UNDP can promote, it can offer, it can encourage, it can catalyze, but we must work within the parameters that we are provided. But there is no question on that. And just to remind you, the overall performance of the gender equality strategy in 2019 was strong. 11 out of the 15 gender responsive output indicators meeting or exceeding their targeted milestones. And the UN SWOP rated UNDP as one of the best performing agencies in the United Nations. And I think these are just indicators that in no way diminish what you have called for, Ambassador. It's just to reaffirm that we are wholeheartedly committed here. And finally, to Maria Angela, the distinguished ambassador of Italy, digital is a universe that in some ways you can categorize in 2 things. Digitization, it is how our organizations essentially move into a digital operating universe. And digitalization, which is essentially everything that happens around us, how it will change with digital technology and platforms. You mentioned the digital finance dimension. I have the privilege at the moment to chair together with the former APSA CEO from South Africa, Maria Ramos, the Secretary General's high-level task force on digital financing, which, by the way, will present its report to the Secretary General in July. The universe of digital finance, not only in terms of what has already begun to happen, what was foreseen to be happening, will transform the world of financing, both in terms of individuals, but also the institutional landscape. And just what we have seen in the last few weeks is remarkable. A country like Togo being able to establish a digital platform for cash transfers to 3 million people, Pakistan with 12 million households and 80 million people being able to transfer funds. The experience we have gained, particularly from Africa, in connecting people who are not even financially existent in the banking system into a dynamic way of transferring funds, identifying also patterns of need. And we have a lot to learn here also from NGOs who have been pioneering schemes and industry. It has been interesting that in the COVID response, in many countries, we have been asked to work with, first of all, governments with digital and telecom companies on the information front, basically getting to citizens, getting information out. Secondly, on the ability to manage the health systems response, tracking, tracing, but also the whole financial architecture for these mitigation measures that were put in place are very much dependent on these digital platforms. But it goes much deeper and further, and together with our UN Capital Development Fund colleagues, UNCDF, we are already working on a digital dimension to finance and development that will be very concrete offers to countries that wish to develop their digital infrastructure, whether it is in terms of just connecting government. And we have another example in India where the event program connects the last district health center in terms of a national and state platform for managing vaccine supplies. We have literally jumped 20 years in terms of ensuring custody and the chain of supply and cooling and not running out of vaccines in these remote centers. This is now being exported to a number of countries by India itself with the example it has developed. And I think I don't have the time today because the president will otherwise turn my microphone off, just to say to the ambassador of Italy, this is a universe that will transform countries, finance, and development work. And UNDP is fully embracing its responsibility to connect countries, because the frontier of development is not inside a UN organization. It's in the countries, in the startup scene, in the technology companies, but they're all turning to us as a great partner. And that is where I see an enormous opportunity for UNDP to be at the frontier of a transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. When you made that comment that I would turn your microphone off, I was about to say to you,
I read your face, President.
As I was saying, as interested as I am with the subject in particular, we have to move on. Thank you so much. We'll now hear from another set of ambassadors making national statements or comments. And we will begin with the permanent representative of Bangladesh, please. Again, I ask if you could limit your time, 2 minutes, as we have said at the top of the meeting. Ambassador Rabat, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I hope you can hear me. Mr. President, Mr. Administrator, I thank you, and with all protocol observed, my delegation aligns itself with the statement made by Guyana on behalf of the G77 and the statement by Malawi on behalf of LDCs. We are meeting in the midst of the gravest and most unprecedented crisis of our time, the COVID-19 pandemic. I thank Administrator Steiner for the report on the work of the organization, and we commend the UNDP's efforts to support countries in tackling the pandemic crisis. While UNDP continues implementing its core mandate, we hope that it will support national efforts, particularly in the most vulnerable countries, in addressing the emergency health needs, as well as in their efforts for post-COVID economic recovery. We urgently need international support and investment to reinforce our healthcare infrastructure and access to equipment and medicines at affordable costs. UNDP has been a trusted partner of Bangladesh in its development endeavors. Bangladesh is at a critical juncture to graduate from the LDC category. Despite being highly climate vulnerable, we have been making steady progress in implementing the SDGs. Our economy will suffer due to the fall in export and remittance earnings, as well as massive joblessness in the different sectors because of the pandemic. In pandemic response, Bangladesh has announced a $12.13 billion stimulus package, which is about 3.7% of our GDP for the various sectors of the economy and for different segments of the population. The 1.1 million Rohingyas that we are hosting are also included in our response and recovery packages. We expect UNDP and the UN country team to complement our efforts, aligning with our needs and priorities. Finally, Mr. Steiner, if you may please wish to share if UNDP would have any special strategy for post-COVID support to countries like Bangladesh, where the number of affected people is likely to be high due to large population base and where the multiplier effects would also be significant. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Ambassador, my good friend. Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to the permanent representative of Egypt. You have the floor, please, Ambassador Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much. Allow me to express my appreciation to you and to distinguished administrator for his valuable, insightful presentation, and also to the all UNDP team in the headquarters and in the field. Really, the presentation is reassuring that UNDP indeed is UNDP in need. And really, a time of grave crisis, we are all in need of our institutions for support. Let me start by saying that this annual session, which is memorial, the way it's taking shape of the executive board this year, is facing a lot of challenges. And there is a need for a large scale, coordinated and comprehensive multilateral response. And this crisis is truly global in all dimensions and by all senses. It is in everyone's interest to ensure that developing countries have the best chance of managing this crisis, or COVID-19 will risk becoming a long-standing brake on economic recovery. I would like to refer that the dimension of technology, digitalization and technology, I would like to give credit here to the UNDP and Chief Administrator himself, because I know how much he is pro technology and digital technology, and lots of projects in our countries were executed in that vein, which are proven now to be so much helpful. And we welcome the efforts made by UNDP in the Arab states and Africa, especially that in Africa, health systems and associated economic costs will derail the socio-economic development trajectory of the Global Sustainable Development Goals and the Regional Agenda 2063 aspirations. I would like also to welcome the UNDP COVID-19 socio-economic impact recovery aspect at the country level, supporting countries to first generate evidence of impact and then make informed decisions on how to tackle it. And there is a need to intensify all such efforts. While every society is vulnerable to the crisis, their abilities to respond differs significantly around the world. That's why we need a collaborative approach to the challenges posed by COVID-19. In conclusion, I would like to thank UNDP for its continuous efforts to respond to practical needs through its institutional infrastructure, especially that they are working both with the Egyptian government and the RC office to ensure the implementation of initiatives of socio-economic recovery. I would conclude by asking about if we talk sometimes about DDR, I think we also have a PPR, which is a prevention, a preparedness, and resilience. How far these factors are incorporated in the plan of the UNDP in the time ahead, and the estimation. Sometimes when you are doing a plan in a challenging situations, then you have estimations that you'll be able to implement how much percent of the plan or the targets, taking the current challenges. So how much expectations we are going to forfeit of the targets, given the current prevailing challenges and the grave situation. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you for the Service Administrator and for UNDP.
I thank you, my brother. I'm Ambassador Mohammed. I give the floor to the permanent representative of Burkina Faso for his statement. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's my pleasure to see you.
A pleasure,
pleasure. Okay, thank you very much. So my delegation endorsed a statement made by the G77 and LDCs. Dear Administrator Akim, as usual, you have once again given a brilliant and comprehensive presentation of the midterm review of the UNDP strategic plan, including your annual report. I want to congratulate you and your senior administrative team for the work done on the ground and for all the results achieved. I would like also to join previous speaker to commend UNDP for its commitment, in particular at this COVID-19 pandemic, at this time of COVID-19 pandemic, and for the support given to countries like mine. UNDP knows very well the situation in Burkina Faso, a country faced with enormous security, humanitarian, and sanitarian challenge. And in November 2020, the presidential election will take place. Mr. Administrator, your report indicates the support of UNDP in governance of peaceful, just, and inclusive societies and crisis prevention and resilience building in Burkina Faso. On this particular point, last July 2019, UNDP coordinate and provide technical support for the joint mission African Development Bank, World Bank, European Union, and United Nations within the framework of evaluation of prevention and peace building assessment. So my question is, how do you appreciate this first experience of coordinating this kind of joint mission, and how is or will be the follow-up after coordinating? Because the importance is to achieve the priority action of the emergency program for 2020-2021. I reiterate the importance given by my country to the effort of UNDP to respond to the evolving challenge for development and ensure it of our support. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, my brother. I thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to hear you. Be with you.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're always doing well.
Thank you. Everybody's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We shall now listen to the next three statements or questions from Guatemala, El Salvador, and New Zealand, after which we will return to Mr. Steiner for responses. I will now, and we can just flow into those three speakers. I will now invite the permanent representative of Guatemala to make her statement, and I will ask the permanent representatives of El Salvador and New Zealand to be on standby. Guatemala, Excellency, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. Guatemala thanks the administrator, Mr. Achim Steiner, for the presentation of the annual report of 2019. Likewise, we value the midterm review of the UNDP Strategic Plan 2018-2021 that provides guidance as well as relevant and timely information key to the decision-making process at the Executive Board. We welcome the achieved progress, especially the contributions made in the context of the repositioning of the United Nations development system, as well as the institutional transformations undertaken. We support the effective coordination within countries and between the funds, agencies, and programs that make up the system today. Under current circumstances, it is essential to face the socio-economic recovery of COVID-19 crisis and to the responsibilities that we have in the decade of action, aligned with the national development plans that should guide the sustainable development cooperation frameworks in each country. Guatemala appreciates and applauds the approval of the first projects of the Response and Recovery Fund to the pandemic and the Humanitarian Response Plan that will greatly contribute to the efforts in my country. The establishment of the fund was possible thanks to the leadership of the Secretary General, to donor countries, and to the good interinstitutional coordinations between funds, programs, and specialized agencies. To extend our special appreciation for these efforts that reach the most vulnerable as a result of this crisis, as well as support the management of these systems for the quarantine of returned migrants under a human rights-centric approach. Our country will not lose sight of the importance of accelerating the implementation of the SDGs, even when the consequences of COVID-19 bring new challenges and much uncertainty. You all know that Guatemala, the subjects of peace building and sustaining peace are so important. We have seen the great results of the UN system on this. How UNDP view the integration of peace building, sustaining peace, and prevention approach in its programming and reporting? In the run-up to the QCPR discussions, what roles and functions do you think UNDP is best suited for providing to the wider role of the UNDS in supporting country efforts to achieve their development plans and priorities? I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The permanent representative of El Salvador, Excellency, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor and for the way you're conducting this segment. Thank you also to Mr. Administrator Steiner for the presentation on the UNDP activities and achievements during the past year, as well as the response to COVID-19. The current country program of El Salvador 2016-2020 has rendered concrete and positive results on the ground, highlighting cooperation around sustainable development, including the SDGs. We expect that the new country program will keep the main focus on the implementation of the Agenda 2030, prioritizing our national needs and serve as a complement on the new UNSDCF, which will be agreed between El Salvador and the UN system through the leadership of the resident coordinator. We also welcome the creation of the Rapid Response Facility to support the efforts of the developing countries against COVID-19, in which El Salvador has already been benefit. In that regard, we would like to highlight that such initiatives should maintain a complementary nature to other efforts of the UN system, and we invite all entities to engage in a coherent and coordinated approach to combat the spread of the pandemic, while also ensuring a sustainable and resilient recovery. Mr. Administrator, as mentioned yesterday, El Salvador is currently facing two fronts. From one side, we are preventing and combating COVID-19, while at the same time, we have to search for survivors and rebuild from the damage caused by Tropical Storm Amanda, which hit our country since the past weekend. Therefore, we look forward to close cooperation with UNDP as a reliable partner in the efforts by the government of El Salvador to address these challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I thank the distinguished permanent representative of El Salvador, and I give the floor to the permanent representative of New Zealand. Craig, you have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, and Akam. Thank you for the opportunity to take the floor. I first of all want to commend UNDP for its quick and adaptive response to the pandemic and really the unprecedented changes in your operating environment. And through you, Akam, please, I'd like to acknowledge all UNDP staff, both at headquarters and in the field, for your continuing service. It's very much appreciated. In so many countries, UNDP's mandate and presence has never been as important or necessary. Thank you for the transparency in the MTR process and the clarity through the signature solutions. I really liked you highlighting your work on governance and the partnership with the Peace Building Fund. We see these as very much as areas of UNDP's comparative advantage. The United Nations has just produced a policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on small island developing states. It makes sobering reading. Its conclusion is that the health, economic, and social impacts on small island developing states will be relatively larger, more sustained, and deeper relative to other countries. And this will accentuate vulnerabilities. So New Zealand's view is that UNDP's work to support the most vulnerable, including the small island developing states, has never looked more relevant. Also, I'd like to join my colleague from Italy around the digital transformation pillar. We're very interested in this work and look forward to working with you on this. We see this as an exciting new area for UNDP's work. Let me end on a question, Mr. President. New Zealand would appreciate an update from UNDP on its SIDS revised offer and implementation. What difference can we see from UNDP at the country level in small island developing states under this revised offer? I thank you very much, and I thank you for the transparency and the dialogue today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you, Craig, and always good to hear your remarks and your continued appeal and support of small island developing states. I will now ask Mr. Steiner, Administrator Steiner, to respond to the 6 presenters and questions and statements. Akim?
Thank you very much, President. If you allow me, may I request perhaps a couple of my senior colleagues to also respond, because I think one, it makes for more interesting viewing and listening, but also you will get a little bit more of the perspective from very real context, because a number of the questions that were raised now by Bangladesh, our dear colleague, the ambassador of Egypt, the ambassador of Burkina Faso, Guatemala, El Salvador, but also New Zealand, I think refer very much to that ability of UNDP in response to national priorities to be able to respond. Will that be okay with you, President? I will just offer one remark.
Indeed.
I thought it is sometimes a coincidence or fate that Bangladesh and Egypt would speak together, because there is a very interesting story here on the digital frontier. Some of you who have been in the board for a while have heard me speak with great admiration about Bangladesh's Access to Information Initiative, this extraordinary program that UNDP has been very privileged to be a part of and to also contribute to, but increasingly to draw from in terms of the extraordinary digital frontiers in development. And to Maria Angela's, the ambassador of Italy's question earlier on, this is one of the countries and examples that we draw on very much when we talk about what does digitalization of development offer as opportunities. But the story here is an interesting one, because Mohammed, maybe unbeknownst to you, the trigger began actually with a workshop where colleagues from the UNDP office in Cairo in Egypt went to Bangladesh to do empathy training for Bangladeshi civil servants. And out of that began this extraordinary story of access to information. So it just shows what I envisage being UNDP's extraordinary contribution, which is to connect cutting edge thinking and shortening the distance between where people have to reinvent things in parallel. So just to emphasize that this is an interesting example also of how we have connected things that have then evolved into something that perhaps was not envisaged before. But if you allow me, President, I will turn to 3 colleagues who very briefly will contribute. One is Abdullah Mardiaye, who, as my special advisor, together with our senior leadership team, is particularly leading the coordination support in UNDP to the socioeconomic response. He co-chaired at the request of the SG and at DSG the task force of interagency work that developed the framework on socioeconomic response. And then I wanted to turn to Kani for a moment and to Luis Felipe, our regional directors for Asia Pacific and also Latin America, to offer a little bit of a country perspective on these questions of what is UNDP's role? What does it bring to the country team right now? What are the perspectives with which we are looking at recovery in a different way from a very real front line of demand? So Mar, over to you, please.
Thank you, Akim, and greetings, ambassadors. Akim, if you would allow me, I would preamble by saying that when I listened to Ambassador Anna Karin and Ambassador Valentine, it was music to my ears, because I felt a validation of our script forward in not only responding, but dealing with the double imperative of dealing with the short term and on the long term. So it is a kind of validation we are on the track. Now, to answer to your question, how do we help countries move fast on the recovery lane? I would say that our now 76 assessment that we got now, our impact assessment, show that what is holding countries for recovery is the contraction of the fiscal space, contraction of sometimes the political space. We can come back to it. There's a lot of elections coming on, and contraction of the civic space. Now, the way we are helping countries is basically on 2 elements. Investing in ensuring that they have more development finance. You have seen the advocacy of the SG on debt, but it's not only debt. How do we link debt to finance and to the real economy? That's why UNDP, and you said it, is investing on implementing the liquidity of the economy by pushing forward this, what we call the INFF, the Integrated National Financial Framework. And this is critical to come to Bangladesh for the countries that are at the vicinity of the frontiers between low-income countries and middle-income countries. They face two risks. Those who hasn't crossed the line yet are facing the risk of being hauled back, and those who have crossed the line will be pushed back. So investing on finance is extremely important. In those countries like Bangladesh, UNDP is leading, and Bangladesh is one of those that we have just approved resources to fund the INFS, like Egypt. So investing in liquidity is the first way to go. The second way to go is investing on acceleration, and digitalization is the way to fast track acceleration. And here I just want to put two examples. What we have been doing in Rwanda on using robots, for instance, to detect COVID-19 is unique. What we are doing in a country like Bangladesh, or a country like Ukraine, supporting the parliaments or the prime minister's office to track the impact of COVID and the responses. So in a nutshell, those are the two. We have many other pressure points like green transition, gender equality, and so on and so forth. But I wanted to focus on those two: one, investing in more liquidity for the economy, and fast tracking the recovery by investing on digitalization. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mar. President, I will just pass on the floor quickly to Kani, our Regional Director for Asia Pacific, followed by our Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, Luis Felipe. So Kani, a 90-second spurt, otherwise I lose all speaking rights with the President for the rest of the morning. Kani, are you there? No, then let me turn to Luis Felipe. Luis Felipe?
Sorry, Akim, I just needed to be unmuted by the host.
Ah, right. Yes, the central powers. Okay, go ahead, Kani.
So two points, and one to the PR of Bangladesh. Thank you for that. In terms of our post-COVID strategy for Bangladesh, and similarly for many LDCs, I would put it very much in the socioeconomic recovery response, driven very in terms of the demand for us, and the demands coming in very specific areas. There are 5 of them. One is jobs, is how do you, in terms of supporting micro and small scale enterprises, really to access the finance and be able to get back into supply chains that have been severely disrupted, and calling on UNDP to come in to support that and look at that, primarily with national partners, including looking at financing. That is very much linked then to social protection, which is that in the interim, there's large numbers of workers who are out of work, and until these jobs are back and online, really looking at whether there is a basic social protection mechanism. Often they are in different parts. We've been asked to come in and look overall at what should be targeted, what is more life cycle type mechanisms that are working, and bringing in lessons from countries that have tried and tested many different mechanisms, including from the region, but also from outside. The third is in the digital, and here the A2I work has been critical, and I would say its application to health systems, particularly at local level, in extending telemedicine, for example, and then the tracking type of work and access to also linking health clinics to be able to stay open through also looking at energy sources through solar. So that links to a critical, and the last area on this is the natural resources, renewable energy issue that is key for our work in Bangladesh, but also in many LDCs, on bringing much more centrally the climate response and the nature-based responses to this. And I do want to say that this package is very key as well to what the PR of New Zealand mentioned, because if I look at the Pacific Island request for us right now, I would say the issues around vulnerability very much line up against doing this. And I'll leave with the example that in countries like Samoa and the Maldives, UNDP is enabling the continuation of government and other state institutions like parliaments and courts to just continue working by providing digital tools to enable this state functioning and government business continuity. Back to you, Akim.
Thank you. And finally, Luis Felipe, a little bit from the Latin American Caribbean perspective, because there were quite a number of comments from there.
Thank you very much, Achim, and thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity. So I'm going to be brief, but I want to start with a very concrete context statement, which is that particularly everywhere, but particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, this crisis is interacting clearly with the structural aspects that we were facing as we entered the crisis, and this very many elements have been exacerbated. And when I mention this, it has to do with the high levels of informality, high levels of inequality, low trust, and low effectiveness of governments or governance as perceived by citizens. So in this context, the crisis, at the same time that exacerbates these issues, has also become an opportunity. I will mention three elements, even though there are others, but that are fundamental in our work right now in the response. One has to do with the support to vulnerable groups. As I said, very high levels of informality and inequality to a social cost that is very unevenly distributed. And as we face the health-related measures, we are looking at a very deep economic impact, as has been documented. So we're working very closely with our counterparts to come up with solutions. In many cases, for example, helping them implement or broaden the registries for cash transfers, a very quick response with cash transfers to vulnerable populations. In other cases, in-kind transfers for particularly vulnerable populations and populations at risk, as we have done in Ecuador, and we are doing in Honduras and in other places. There is also a gap of knowledge that we're trying to bridge in a very concrete and rapid response to deploy knowledge that we gather from other places for governments to respond. An example, we have an agreement with a think tank that manages digital information on mobility. And we are right now using this, for example, in Colombia, to address elements related to understand how the mobility patterns are related to the vulnerability of certain groups and try to respond quickly to that and to monitor the effectiveness of the health-related measures. But also it has to do with this issue I mentioned on governance. So we're trying to, for example, trying to support government monitor the response to the pandemic and try to see how we can fine-tune this response. And also, for example, with the initiatives in Uruguay on fake news and in other places, along with UNESCO, to try to make pedagogical interventions to try to educate population in terms of not following sometimes news that are completely unrelated to the actual solutions to the problem. I close with one that is very important, and is the gap in terms of funding, where these crises have brought us together closely with the World Bank, with the Inter-American Development Bank, with CAF in the case of the LAC region, and we're working more closely with them to try to help them in the implementation of specific programs, and with private sector initiatives, for example, in Paraguay, that have actually created the space as the UNDP for private sector to actually be part of the solution and the response. These are just some examples of what we're doing in the LAC region. Thanks for the opportunity, Administrator.
President, straight back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akim and members of the team. We have a number of representatives still asking who have asked for the floor. So we will begin straight away with the permanent representative of India. We will then follow that by the permanent representative of the Czech Republic. Then we'll have a group statement from Switzerland, speaking directly from capital. We'll begin with the permanent representative of India. Excellency, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I thank Administrator Achim Steiner for his statement and for his leadership of UNDP. I'm heartened to listen to his remarks and to his priorities and strategies. The global outbreak of COVID-19 triggered a health crisis, which has quickly transformed into an economic, social, and humanitarian crisis with long-term effects on developmental priorities and prospects. Member states are seized with the impact of the pandemic and are reviewing their developmental priorities and reallocating their dwindling resources. I would like to touch briefly on a few areas. At the outset, we need to reprioritize the UNDP priorities as per the partner countries' new development priorities to, at the very least, mitigate the consequences of this COVID crisis. This is already being done. While Agenda 2030 remains the goal, it is possible that the short-term priorities and maybe even some medium-term priorities may be slightly different, though not necessarily contradictory. UNDP should be nimble enough to react to these changed immediate set of priorities of partner countries. It is equally important to focus on specific priority areas, since developing countries may be hit in varying degrees depending on their worst affected sectors, for example, tourism. Reprioritizing naturally puts the focus on the health sector as well as social protection. It is also hard to imagine how the world would have coped with such a disruption without the digital tools that we possess today. Hence, technology and digital people-centric solutions should become a critical component of our development paradigm. I note that UNDP is embracing such digital technologies, but we need to promote this in partner countries in a big way. Prioritizing the needs of the poor and the vulnerable will have to receive the highest priority with respect to digital initiatives. In recent years, India has undertaken transformative development and people-friendly programs fully integrated through digital technology. This has come as a blessing during these times, and I thank the administrator for referring this in his statement. The current crisis underlined the need for partnership in leaving no one behind and in prioritizing the needs of the most vulnerable. In this context, India has taken every effort, despite the difficult circumstances at home, to extend its support to our partners around the world, from supply of essential medicines, testing kits, to deployment of rapid response teams to other countries, and to conducting courses from our premier healthcare institution through our flagship ITEC program. India's development partnership is critical to South-South partnership. As one of the largest contributors to UNDP among the developing countries, we take keen interest in the organization's success. I assure you of our steadfast commitment to UNDP in catering to COVID times and beyond to adapt to new development priorities. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Excellency, the permanent representative of India. I give the floor to the permanent representative of the Czech Republic. You have the floor, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Administrator, dear colleagues. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. My country acknowledges the role of the UNDP in maintaining focus on socio-economic aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the importance of development aspects of this crisis, especially in the long term. We recognize the progress made since the launch of the strategic plan, especially concerning the improvement of access to basic services and strengthening human rights systems. We remain an active partner of the UNDP. Over the last 15 years, the Czech UNDP Trust Fund, in cooperation with the UNDP Regional Office in Istanbul, supported over 215 initiatives, including local businesses and municipalities. Recently, it has been succeeded by the Czech UNDP Partnership for SDGs, bringing initiative solutions to sustainable development. And we also provide contributions to the UNDP core budget. Let me ask the following 3 questions. First, concerning the UNDP response to COVID-19 pandemic, the Czech Republic highly appreciates the emphasis on coordination of the response within the UN system. Would you please share with us your views on the lessons learned from the COVID-19 response coordination within the UN system in general and with the WHO in particular? Second, SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions are among the key priorities of the Czech strategy of development cooperation. How is the UNDP proceeding in maintaining democratic processes during the pandemic? And my third question, the Czech Republic has been a long-standing partner of UN volunteers. Over the last 20 years, more than 350 Czech volunteers served in partner countries, and we currently aspire for the top 10 ranking among UNV collaborators. How does the UNDP assess the cooperation with the UNV as an organization and the benefits of having international volunteers? I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Excellency. I now give the floor to the representative in the capital of Switzerland. You have the floor, please, and it's a delight to have a representative from capital attend the meeting virtually. Thank you.
Mr. President, I make this statement on behalf of Albania, Australia, Austria, Belgium, Brazil, Bulgaria, Canada, Colombia, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Mexico, Moldova, Montenegro, New Zealand, Norway, Peru, Romania, Sweden, the Netherlands, the Republic of Korea, the United Kingdom, Ukraine, and my own country, Switzerland. A full version will be made available on PaperSmart. We thank the four funds and programs for the evaluability assessment of the common chapter. We welcome that the original intent offered an impetus to enhance collaboration. We also note that the framework for the operationalization, follow-up, and evaluation of the common chapter has not been developed and therefore recognize that undertaking an evaluation at this point in time might be premature. The common chapter was developed based on the principle that the Agenda 2030 is the overarching framework to guide all your work. The QCPR and the UNDS Reform Resolution 72/279 are clear that UNDS entities should reflect their contributions to the 2030 agenda in their strategic plans. The common chapter provides an outline for you to take an integrated approach to achieving the SDGs, which is key to the success of the reforms. There is proof that the common chapter is beneficial to your work at country level. In the MTR survey, 100% respondents stated that the common chapter was either a key driver or a positive influence for improved collaboration. As long as there is significant room for improvement for the collaboration between the four funds and programs, operationalizing the common chapter deserves your and our full attention. The UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Frameworks focus on country-level cooperation and coordination. As long as there is no better alternative that gives concrete strategic orientation for enhanced collaboration at global and regional levels, operationalizing the common chapter must be a priority. We take the point that the common chapter needs to be considered within the broader context of the UNDS reform. The challenges now highlighted in the evaluability assessment are the same challenges we see on a system-wide level. We support the UN system's continued efforts to concretely formulate how the sum of its individual parts adds up to a comprehensive UN system support to member states at country level. In order for the UNDS reform to succeed, there needs to be clarity on where synergies lie and how they're leveraged for a coordinated and efficient UNCT to stand with the RCs. This is especially relevant in the areas of the UN's core mandate of policy advice and normative frameworks. We expect the 4 funds and programs to demonstrate leadership and implement the common chapter. For us, it is an integral part of each agency's strategic plan. We strongly believe that the common chapter must be fully operationalized with a proper framework in order to be implemented as part of your current strategic plans. The evaluability assessment offers valuable lessons on how this can be done. We will hold you to account not only on the delivery of the common chapter, but we also expect funds and programs to further integrate the UNDS reform mandate of 2018 in the remaining implementation of the strategic plan.
Ambassador, you have to wrap up, please.
Yes, I am about to wrap up. Lessons learned from the implementation of these elements will guide us in identifying how the concept of a common chapter should be redefined for the next strategic plan period. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much. We will hear 3 more speakers before we have Mr. Steiner and then go into the last round. So we'll have the DPRs, the Deputy Permanent Representatives of Colombia, Japan, and Russia. And you can speak in that order. Colombia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you to the Administrator and members of the Executive Board. I thank you for convening this important session in which Colombia is honored to participate. I would like to highlight UNDP's commitment to the reform of the United Nations Development System, as well as its support to countries in their efforts to achieve the SDGs. Also, I recognize the contributions of UNDP in the implementation of its strategic plan. The program has contributed to increase the financial stability and efficiency in the use of resources, while investing in more development programs and services. We have possibly observed the reinforcement of teamwork, the better use of its comparative advantages on the field, and the significant advance in gender parity. In this sense, we consider very important the creation of new associations aimed at building peace and humanitarian affairs, improving populations' access to basic services, strengthening local governance, protecting human rights, among other issues. And let me here underline the positive transformation of the knowledge functions of the UNDP, and we see very positive results in Latin America. For Colombia, it is very clear that there are valuable advances in the implementation of the UNDP strategic plan. However, today we face a double challenge: to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic and to reach the SDGs. This should be the decade of action. I would like to underline the need to start laying the foundations for the next strategic plan and to strengthen the articulated action on the United Nations system. Here, we would like Mr. Steiner to comment on, especially on the laying the foundations for the next strategic plan. There is no doubt that this is the time for more cooperation, more coordination, and solidarity. Working together is the only possible path to overcome the challenges of what could be called the global triple crisis: health, economic, and political. To conclude, I wish to evoke to the philosopher Aristotle, who used to state, "It is during the darkest moments that we must focus to see the light." I invite you to seek and see the light. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll have Japan, please, Deputy Permanent Representative.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm delighted to hear the report and all the progress made so far today. And Japan enjoys a partnership with UNDP. Akim, you stressed integration. Japan counts on your integrated approach as the lead agency in the socio-economic response. The humanitarian needs are there on the ground, but the pandemic, for instance, is more than a humanitarian crisis. and we are all aware of its tremendous ramification on the livelihood and the dignity of the people. To counter these complex human security challenges of unprecedented magnitude, we need UNDP. And we'd like to support UNDP's comprehensive, integrated, and I should add, innovative strategy. In this regard, I'm very pleased to confirm that our latest financial contribution of some $68.4 million was disbursed directly to your account yesterday. Since the discussion today is so thought-provoking, I'd like to make two quick observations. First one is my modest recommendation of incorporating concrete human security perspective more systematically as UNDP plans, implement, and assess your programs or projects in many areas, including governance and resilience of the program countries. Conceptually speaking, human development and human security are actually complementary to each other. When program countries are faced with human development challenges of vulnerabilities in governance and resilience, for example, human security policy tools can provide specific tailor-made protection and empowerment solutions to assist the recipient government, strengthen their ownership so that they can function more effectively for governance, social protection, or even green economy you mentioned. I'm sure that UNDP can find ample best practices to support these correlations between human security and human development. And I'd like to see more of these examples in your midterm review or future projects. Second is my encouragement of using non-core budget more flexibly and creative way. For example, a project funded by Japan, Japan's non-co-op contributions are formulated respecting the proposals from the country offices to the extent possible, taking into account the needs of the recipient countries. And so that I know that the co-funds are so central to you, but there are ways to avoid the fragmentation of the funds, even by using the non-core funds through their constructive or creative use. So those are the points which came to my mind. Thank you very much for the floor. And President, thank you very much.
Thank you. We now have the Deputy Permanent Representative of Russia, please.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you. Russia appreciates the level of cooperation with UNDP and the fact that it is based on the promotion of socioeconomic development of partner countries. We believe that socioeconomic recovery is the most important goal in the post-COVID-19 time. Having said that, we would like to ask, how does UNDP view the new normal in ensuring the best ways of keeping people out of poverty, including by creating new jobs and providing more secure social guarantees, especially for small businesses? We commend UNDP's work on helping countries achieve and integrate SDGs and in preparation of their VNRs. Russia is presenting its own VNR at this year's HLPF. Through this work is challenging, it's instrumental to accelerate the achievement of SDGs. Talking of SDGs, would like to note once again that we're not supportive of prioritizing SDG 16 over other goals due to their indivisible character. And we encourage UNDP to keep this in mind while further implementing the strategic plan. At the second regular session, the board will be presented with the evaluation of UNDP's climate work. For us, it's important to see what's the current division of labor on this track in the UN system. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you so much, Excellency. We will hear two other Deputy Permanent Representatives before we return to the Administrator. So we'll call on the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Korea, and then the Deputy Permanent Representative of Peru. And we'll ask Korea to speak now. You have the floor, please. Deputy
President, I just waited for the organizer to unmute. Thank you, President. And also would like to thank Mr. Achim Steiner, the administrator, of your comprehensive statement as well as your excellent stewardship in these unsettling times. We are very much appreciative of the dedication, unswavering dedication, and continued service of all of your team members during this crisis. My delegation believes that it is the time that the UNDP, as a leading development agency, can flex its institutional muscle to full extent and lead by example the post-COVID response through nimble and flexible operations. It is also time for the UNDP to help countries see a complete picture of pandemic's socio-economic impact and carry out post-COVID response in an efficient and effective way. Having said that, I have just a couple of points to share with you. First, we welcome the UNDP is on track towards achieving its strategic plan. In particular, we are pleased to see that the UNDP has solidified its integration of its offer around the 4 dedicated work streams. Given the complexity and magnitude of development challenges, UNDP's integration initiatives should continue to bridge missing links between individual SDGs and provide more coherent support. Also, it would be useful for the board members to hear about the challenges faced in the field offices during their implementation. And the second, the UNDP needs to ensure that it pursues a coherent and holistic approach, fully taking into account the humanitarian, development, and peace nexus. Even with the UNDP's increased support to crisis-affected and fragile settings, a siloed approach would not be able to address underlying instability and lock in development gains. So we expect that the UNDP, as a technical lead for the UN's socio-economic response and recovery, will continue its efforts to overcome COVID and also build back better. So during that journey, Korea will remain supportive, fully supportive of UNDP to get everybody back on track. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll hear from the Deputy Permanent Representative of Peru.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to thank Achim Steiner for his leadership in these complex times, as well as for his comprehensive presentation, and also the valuable remarks and comments he made during this presentation. Peru and UNDP have a strong relationship of collaboration with important results in the fight against poverty during the last 20 years. In that sense, we welcome the progress portrayed in the midterm review. We are a firm supporter of the program role in helping governments achieve the SDGs in line with each country's priorities and special needs, as well as for his power of integration. As we all know, before the pandemic, there was already a stall in progress in many of the SDGs. And with the current crisis, many of what was gained may be reverted. We are particularly worried about what is being done and planned to help those in vulnerable situations that are especially affected by the pandemic, those in poverty, fragility, or conflict, putting all development gains at risk. It is inevitable that inequality will rise. This would entail accelerating structural transformations for sustainable development, especially through innovative solutions with multiplier effects on SDGs, and also to strengthen resilience to crises, such as the one we are experiencing. Peru stands ready to work with UNDP in the socio-economic response to the pandemic. As the UN technical lead, the importance of building back better must contemplate an emphasis on issues relating to health, education, human rights, gender equality, climate change, and digitalization, with particular importance in partnerships with the private sector and UN bodies such as WHO. Finally, we need to be able to use the lessons learned from the current crisis to enhance our ability to achieve true sustainable development, in which society, the economy, and the environment walk hand in hand. In this endeavor, we need strong multilateral institutions, quick coordination, more international cooperation, and solidarity. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I thank the distinguished delegates and Deputy Permanent Representative of Peru. So I will return to the administrator for his responses, and then we will conclude with 3 final speakers from the United States of America, from their capital, Guyana, from their capital, and China. So we will begin with Mr. Steiner and his team responding. Akim, it's to you, please.
Thank you very much, President. And I, with your permission, maybe just turn to one more of my colleagues, Arjuna, to perhaps speak a little bit about, how we envisage what happens next while we're actually facing a, drifting backwards. And this is, for a continent like Africa, a particular focus right now, because it is the continent that has had perhaps the slowest arrival of the health crisis, and in some ways the fastest unfolding of the economic and social impacts that have come from the measures that have happened. And yet it is also a continent in which envisaging a future that is more resilient, sustainable, may very well be a way forward. But let me not overlook the specific point. I still owe New Zealand a brief response also on the SIDS aspect. And just to say to you, Ambassador, UNDP already has a portfolio of 121 million newly focused on blue economy and the linked up work on climate change and digital frontiers. And we have in the pipeline another 81 million portfolio that will allow us to rapidly scale up our work under the SIDS offer. And again, UNDP is not a financing institution. This is funding to help countries to finance, leverage finance and investment, and hopefully build capacity in institutions that will be able to take this developmental perspective forward. We count on our partners, obviously, to work with us, and we thank also the SIDS who themselves sometimes co-finance this. May I take this opportunity to also welcome Ambassador Tirumurti, because I think this is the first time, Ambassador, that you are addressing our executive board. Welcome to New York and to these challenging times, and thank you for your comments, which are very heartening for me and I think for UNDP. I have been a lifelong student of India's approach to trying to address development in the sense of acceleration, but also addressing inequality, the structural constraints to addressing poverty eradication. And I think you're pointing towards a people-centric set of solutions is absolutely what I think we are in part going to see define that new normal, that way forward. There is no doubt in my mind that what we already saw in the 2-3 years leading up to 2020, in some ways the tail end of the financial crisis, was a growing dissatisfaction of people with how the system essentially delivers development benefits and outcomes, whether it's the concentration of incomes, whether it is the fact that productivity gains largely accumulate in the capital ownership rather than in the workforce that actually generates this. I mean, there are many ways that economists measure Gini coefficients, but I think that notion of a people-centric solution will define responses in social policy, in recovery packages, but also in future pathways in different sectors. And you mentioned the health sector and the social protection sector. I think UNDP is very much trying to live up to that expectation of agility, flexibility, and speed. Clearly, we do not reinvent a license to operate for UNDP, but we are able, with your support and confidence, with the flexibility of our finances, but also with the portfolio that we have, I think truly live up to that partnership that countries are looking for right now, as they are trying to, in a world where nobody knows exactly what is going to happen next, to have validation, triangulation, and the support of a trusted partner. And this, I think, is an asset I always am fascinated by because of UNDP's long-standing presence. It is a trusted partner to sometimes think about unthinkable things that need to be discussed in national development thinking and decision-making. And that creates space for innovation. Let me also recognize that many of us in the development field draw on India's financial inclusion programs. I mean, I personally have followed it, have seen it with my own eyes. I look to India continuously as a source in both bringing the promise of digital possibilities together with a people-centered and development-centered view of how we can make these tools work for us. And I think you referred to it, India has been leading in this field, and certainly our presence in India today as a strong partner to India is as much about working with India as it is also to seek India's collaboration with UNDP. So I take advantage of your arrival to set that out. Let me also recognize the contribution that India makes to the financing of UNDP. It is in many respects something that you have maintained over many years. It is significant. And I also want to take the opportunity to recognize the support that India recently and China in more significant financing have provided to the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. In the statement of the G77 at the beginning, the Distinguished Representative of Guyana referred to South-South Cooperation. I think after the hosting of BAPA Plus 40 in Argentina, a new agenda, I think the support through South-South Cooperation, also with the kind of financing that is available to the office right now, will further accelerate its role and relevance as much as it is an integral part of the way we in UNDP think about our work on this front. Very briefly to the Ambassador of the Czech Republic, I want to acknowledge again the Czech and UNDP Trust Fund, and I appreciate your question in terms of coordination in the UN system. And I think in very brief terms, coordination right now is at a significantly higher level. One, because we have a crisis, and that always brings a system all together. The WHO has been, since January, the lead agency in terms of bringing us together as a system in helping countries address the health systems crisis and response. And as you all know, that systems response in the health sector is not just a matter of medicine and medical professionals. It is about budgets, it's about institutional capacity, it's about business continuity. And that is why, including procurement for that matter, in which UNDP alongside UNICEF, WFP, and a number of other agencies is playing a critical role right now with the WHO guidance to help countries move forward. So that track is well coordinated. The second track, in the 40 or so countries that are facing humanitarian crisis, the humanitarian response plan is the framework. We are well coordinated. We meet almost on a weekly basis. And I think, again, the collaboration is very good. And with the UN socioeconomic framework, the Secretary General has set out a third track. And within that, at the country level, clear accountabilities. The resident coordinator is accountable for a UN system response on COVID-19 being coordinated in the country. UNDP, alongside the WHO lead on the medical or health system response, provides the lead technical support to the country team to actually stand up a response in that field. So I think that coordination aspect is working well. I think largely also countries are feeling that and are turning very much to the UN also as one of the, let's say, anchor partners in reaching out to the international community. And obviously our collaboration with the international financial institutions is critical here because they are very much part of that international capacity to respond. President, if you allow me briefly on the comments by Switzerland and the countries who commented on the common chapter, I agree very much with the statement that it is a commitment that we made as part of our strategic plans and therefore remains very much an integral part also of the accountability that we have towards realizing and fulfilling the commitments that we made in the common chapter. Having said that, I just want to emphasize, however, that the common chapter is, you know, something that was conceived before the UNDS reform was adopted. So to some extent, elements around which we are bound by the GA resolution, by the newly conceived resident coordinator system, must obviously also take account of the fact that we are collaborating both within the common chapter, but also beyond that. And I also want to just for the record say, I mean, the common chapter is not a program or a project or an instrument or tool. I think our agreement with you at the time was that it is integral to the strategic plan. It informs a particular set of priorities and commitments in the 6 areas of the 4 agencies. But I think I would urge you to view it as part of our overall obligation and accountability to report to you in the context of the strategic plan, the IRFs, and the specific commitments we made there. And we will continue to do that as you have asked for. And in that sense, I think the role and the principal relevance of the common chapter is not at all in question. But I think we need to be pragmatic and realistic, and also the fact that I would argue that in the partnerships with UNICEF and with UNFPA and UN Women, we have actually gone further than the common chapter envisaged. But this is also a little bit the lesson that we're learning. A common chapter was conceived of as a tool in holding us accountable, but the evaluability review clearly showed that it is perhaps best addressed within an assessment of how the institutions are meeting their commitments. But we will gladly continue to engage with you. If I may now, with your permission, President, just turn to my colleague Ahuna for a moment, just to respond a little bit on that reality of, again, COVID, that new normal. Is it visible already in the midst of an abnormal reality right now? So Ahuna, if you are ready, maybe just 2 minutes, otherwise we're going to curtail our member states.
Thank you, Akim. Mr. President, Excellencies. It is real on the continent of Africa already. Numbers are not what we've seen elsewhere, but the socioeconomic impact was almost instant in terms of jobs being immediately lost. And of course, several countries in Africa already had pre-existing conditions, from issues related to Ebola, for instance, in the DRC. So health pandemics were already either still on or being recovered from. And then you had also high humanitarian needs in several countries. All issues that still need attention and urgent attention. And on top of that, then the COVID-19 impact. We're analyzing this as having three order effects: the first, the second, and third orders. And there you see highlighted the need for policies that would accompany each of those orders, whether they're related to macro level situations, fiscal, or the promotion of social safety nets. One of the things that's being revealed today is the fact that several African countries are low on social protection measures and schemes. And this creates an opportunity to actually install a system that covers a wider group of people on social protection. The other visible opportunity that we're seeing is in the Africa trading with itself domain in terms of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and the possibility of creating a new lifeline for production in both goods and services, particularly those that are needed to address viruses and pandemics such as this, which Africa has a huge share of. But the answer to that really is that, yes, we're seeing the effects already, even as the impact has lagged on the epidemiological issue, but the socioeconomic impact is quite severe. We, as Akim said earlier, we have already done the assessments in many of these countries, and it's clear that there are more needs and less money.
Thank you. And President, in all the remarks by the Hoshino-san of DPR of Japan, Dmitry DPR of Russia, also of Korea and Peru, underlying that is that sense of what will drive what happens next. And I think we all have to be honest, we really don't quite know yet. What I can tell you from everything that I see and what we are observing also through the surveys, but also talking to our colleagues in the IMF, it's going to get worse first. The desired V-shaped scenario of a dramatic drop and then a dramatic recovery is, in the words of economic alphabet, giving way to a U-shaped recovery. And I think we don't even know yet what that recovery may eventually be driven by. I think we know some of the underlying factors, and I appreciate the observations that Hoshino-san, also Master of Columbia and colleagues gave in terms of where we as UNDP have been trying to, not least with the Human Development Report last year, point to the vulnerabilities in our societies, but also in the economic models and in the broader legitimacy of a global development model. Dimitri, you asked about the new normal. In the next few weeks, we will be sharing with you some of our thinking. We are working on a vision paper to try and conceive of that new normal. We are in the process of identifying 7 tipping points that we think will be critical in different configurations in each country to be able to anticipate, at least in terms of scenarios, what might play out. Because one of you said earlier on that this is a social and economic and a political crisis. And I think we do not need to remind ourselves very much that the political crisis is almost inevitable if the social and economic and health responses are inadequate. And we are seeing this across the globe right now. And I think there are profound erosions of fundamental rights, of democracy, but also of credibility and trust in government. And I think they have been fascinating to observe across the spectrum of developed to developing, large and small economies. This is not the differentiator here anymore. In fact, in some of the poorer developing countries, government trust has grown because of the wise, fast, and very effective responses, while some of the wealthiest countries have lost significant capital in their public in the responses. So I think the new normal, in part, will also play out in the way that we deal with governments and the social contract, that first area of the 4 that I outlined to you earlier on when I spoke to the, let's say, the 4 themes that are emerging in terms of demand. The governance domain, the role of the state, the trust in the state, the centrality of state functions in stabilizing economies and societies clearly is a key part. I think social protection, and Ahuna just referred to it, we will see out of this crisis perhaps a realization that universal healthcare is not a luxury and that there are different stepping stones towards it. Maybe we need that micro health insurance that is government subsidized, but essentially carried forward through private sector insurance companies as an intermediate stepping stone towards a national health service that is fully funded. Digital connectivity. You don't change the quality of education just by plugging a school into the internet, but you create extraordinary possibilities for overcoming the lack of capacity and training of teachers that so often holds back generations of school children in rural schools. And that is why I think we can indeed begin to look at the new normal in ways that we had not conceived of before. And I think our role as UNDP is to, at the level of the country, be part of that national discourse, but please also trust me, we are heavily engaged in helping through the HDR, but also with the Secretary General in his responses and strategic policy papers and initiatives on finance, on Africa, on the socioeconomic response, heavily engaged in supporting the thinking there and bringing evidence from the countries up, as opposed to second guessing the future of the world top down. And I think that has to be one of the strengths that UNDP brings also to the global reflection. President, back to you.
Thank you very much. So we will go into the final round, I guess, and we would look at, we will hear from our colleagues, some of whom are speaking from their capitals. The United States of America would be first. Delegate of the United States of America, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. A big thank you to Administrator Steiner for his statement, as well as thanks to UNDP colleagues for managing such a seamless virtual session so far, fingers crossed, and also conducting very flawless, in my judgment, a team effort to respond to all the questions from the floor. As I'm one of the last speakers, I would also like to thank all the previous member state speakers for a rich discussion, which I believe has made my job very easy in this interactive dialogue. So, Mr. President, I would just like to use this opportunity to react very quickly to a couple of points in Mr. Steiner's statement having to do with UNDP's work on governance and the need to continue to focus on UNDP's core competencies and the mandates. Namely, they are governance, poverty, and crisis prevention and recovery. As the administrator said, UNDP's governance work accounts for 40%, if I heard correctly, of the organization's program volume. And it is the largest investment in a single work area. So we would like to hear the administrator's thoughts on how best to capitalize on this investment and the competency to drive UNDP's diverse work streams in the remainder of this strategic plan period, as well as in planning for the next period. We strongly encourage UNDP to continue to sharpen its focus on governance-related work. In our view, UNDP's ability to explain its work in these core competency and mandate areas in the strategic plan, as well as in the integrated resource and results framework, will help UNDP to showcase its abilities, sharpen its contributions to UN's peace, security, and prosperity agenda, as well as to demonstrate its value to program countries, as well as to the donors. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. I thank the distinguished delegates of the United States, and I give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Guyana, speaking from Capital.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for recognizing capitals. Guyana is delighted to see you preside over what is undoubtedly a seminal session of the board, and we commend your leadership and that of the Bureau for the arrangements that have been made. Guyana is persuaded of the importance of advancing the work of UNDP and the UN development system as a whole in what is a very challenging global environment conditioned by the need for transformational changes to advance the SDGs, the COVID-19 pandemic, the unrelenting climate change challenge, and inequalities at all levels. For this reason, we're heartened by the presentation of Administrator Steiner, which illustrated the severity and significance of the challenges we face. We welcome the many advances that have been made with respect to UNDP performance on the core strategic objectives. But as someone has said, a crisis is an opportunity too valuable to squander, and therefore Guyana encourages urgent efforts to give effect not only to a next generation UNDP, but a now generation UNDP to deliver in all areas in keeping with high global expectations. In this regard, I believe that Guyana's partnership with UNDP at the national level gives us confidence that we can and will rise together to the challenge of our times. Indeed, as a reliable development partner, UNDP has and continues to accompany the development process in Guyana at a very significant juncture of our development. These endeavors include, with respect to our current electoral process, Guyana's chairmanship of the G77 and China this year, the Spotlight Initiative, Indigenous land titling process, the Green State Development Strategy, and of course, responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe and hope that the real challenges and opportunities before us would help to refine UNDP's work in terms of making it more flexible and effective, and thus contribute to the overall impact and contribution of UNDP to development. So again, Mr. President, we commend you, and it is thrilling that these innovations are done under your presidency, and we thank Administrator Steiner as we look forward to outcomes from this session that will advance our shared development objectives. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Guyana, former New York colleague, and it's a great pleasure to hear you and to know that you are participating effectively and practically within this framework. Thank you so much. We call on the distinguished delegate of China. You have the floor, please. Is China with us? You may need to unmute yourself.
Yes. Good morning. You hear me? Thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership in the board and smoothly convening the meeting. So we do have a very rich full meeting, and thank my colleagues for their rich full thoughts. I'm honored to be the last speaker. China aligned itself with a statement delivered by Guyana on behalf of G77 and China. And we thank Mr. Administrator Steiner for his leadership and the comprehensive report. We also commend UNDP, especially your headquarter regional and country team, for your dedication and support to program countries in their response to COVID-19 and strive for social economic recovery. We are also grateful to UNDP for your timely assistance to Chinese people in time of difficulty. So we acknowledge your achievement made in the implementation of the strategic plan, but with time constraint, I'll skip the detail. As we enter the decade of action, and many developing countries count on UNDP's support to mitigate the social economic impact of pandemic and continue push forward progress in eradication of poverty, improving people's livelihoods, driving climate change, comprehensively promoting sustainable development. So we believe it's very imperative for UNDP to keep development focus, keep poverty eradication as a central pillar, supporting national ownership and leadership by aligning your work with national priorities. Global solidarity is key now to win the battle against COVID-19 and keep on track to sustainable development. So we call for continuous support to UNDP to increase its resources and improve resource structure. And we highly appreciate many member states who has contributed politically and financially. China will continue cooperation with UNDP either inside China in our final battle against poverty, extreme poverty, and also supporting other developing countries for common development through South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. So last but not least, we welcome the progress made by UNOPS in implementing its strategic framework and encourage UNOPS to support and facilitate South-South cooperation according to its principle. And thank you, Mr. President, and also thank all the members of the Executive Board and also the Secretariat to make this meeting successful.
I thank the distinguished delegates of China, and I'm sorry to tell you, you're not the last one. We certainly appreciate your presentation. Unfortunately, 2 people asked after you spoke. The meeting is going very well, I guess. So we will have the distinguished representative from Finland, next, and then we will close with the representative from the European Union speaking as a donor. So we will hear from our distinguished delegate from Finland. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks to Mr. Steiner for his comprehensive presentation. I would still like to present a couple of questions. As UNDP is the key actor in promoting SDG 16, it is commendable that SDG 16 remains in focus in the organization's work. The MTR report notes, however, that many indicators for Goal 16 are moving in the wrong direction. At the same time, UNDP sees that its own work on governance has been rather successful. It would be interesting to hear more about this. What does UNDP see as the key for its success in the area despite the global trends, and what could it do more to try to reverse the global trend? Secondly, we would encourage UNDP to strengthen linkages between human rights and the 2030 development agenda in its work, and promote the synergies between these two agendas also at the country level. We would like to know what kind of impact the Secretary General's call to action on human rights has had on UNDP's work, and whether your cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights could be enhanced and diversified. It would also be interesting to hear how UNDP has modified its operations to fit the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, and how this may affect its future implementation. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Finland, and I give the floor to the distinguished delegate of the European Union who speaks as a donor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also to UNDP Administrator Steiner for his very, very informative briefing. As indicated by our Swedish and Rwandan colleagues, the EU has joined the two statements on COVID and on gender. The EU as a donor and the UNDP have been successfully engaged in promoting integrated national financial frameworks as key tools for furthering the implementation of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement at national level. We've been quite successful, as I said. 16 countries have so far volunteered to pilot the initiative, and 86 developing countries have endorsed the launch of an INFF under the second call of the joint SDG fund. In the meantime, however, the COVID pandemic has hit these countries and diverted attention and resources to tackling the immediate crisis. So my question is, how is UNDP factoring in the impact of COVID in the integrated national financial frameworks? And secondly, I would ask a question on the increasingly important role that UNDP plays in fragile context. Already before COVID, 9 out of the 10 biggest recipients fall in this category and represent 40% of UNDP's delivery. Against this backdrop, we commend the work of the Crisis Bureau and the strengthened focus on Signature Solution 3, crisis prevention and resilience. However, it's clear that more needs to be done to address these fragilities. What measures is UNDP taking to step up efforts in this respect, and what impact will this have on your organization and staff? And where do you see the biggest challenges in the humanitarian development peace nexus? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, the distinguished delegates of the European Union. That was our last speaker, and we will now return to Mr. Steiner and his team for responses. Mr. Steiner, please.
Thank you, President. I'm very conscious that time has, in a sense, run out. Otherwise, I would love to bring some more of my senior management. I mean, we have our regional director, Miriana, my associate administrator, Murad, but also Asako and Hao Liang, who have been at the center of leading the response here in UNDP on the COVID-19 Response Crisis Bureau, BPPS. So I just want to mention them because they would contribute a lot, but I realize that we don't have time left, and I have to briefly just make sure that I respond to some of the points that were raised just now. First of all, to the comment from the United States, and thank you very much for your feedback also. I think the midterm review has both shown the responsiveness of the strategic plan to where you see the priorities for UNDP, and therefore the figure is indeed 40% of our expenditure is indeed in the domain of governance, and crisis prevention and recovery account for 46% of the expenditure, the 9 out of the 10 largest programs being in crisis countries. And just to give you a sense that this is not an anomaly, we are very much committed to working in the most difficult context. So the rapid response facility we set up at the end of February, and that delivered to 100 countries these rapid grants within turnaround times of 72 hours. 45 out of the 58 fragile countries in the world were included in the rapid response facility. We also took a very deliberate decision on something that many had warned me against, which is on the accelerator labs. We have included some of the most fragile countries in where we have invested in our UN country teams in actually inserting an accelerator lab in our team there, because we believe that it is actually in those contexts sometimes where unusual responses are needed, and the fragility also creates, let's say, possibilities that we need to learn better how to utilize as an agency. So I think I would like to perhaps just borrow of His Excellency Torrington's comments, because in some ways they so well illustrate the discussion that we often have in the board. When you say, what is the best, how best to capitalize on the investment that UNDP has made and in its areas of strength. Now, if you recall, when Mr. Torrington described where UNDP has been a critical partner to Guyana, I was very grateful because you gave me the best illustration of why I always say UNDP is not a sectoral agency, and it is in the support of elections, of the Spotlight Initiative on gender-based violence, on the issue of land titles, and on greening the economy, that precisely our work is addressing governance challenges, opportunities, and priorities of a country. An election is at the core of what we often think is governance, but actually land titles, fundamental rights that are enshrined by law, but are also in a cataster and in a register, and therefore create protection of individuals against simply being deprived of their rights to their lands, be they indigenous peoples or landowners, and gender-based violence and the greening of the economy, which is very much the governance of government policy. What sectors can be supported? How do we ensure inclusion also in a rapidly evolving economy? To me, those are the areas that best describe as examples why governance is such a central part of, first of all, the way governments look to UNDP, and why UNDP has to be a smart organization. Here I want to borrow briefly from the terminology that the DPR of Korea used. Flex your institutional muscles, be nimble, be flexible. And I would add, we will do so gently, but with confidence, because I think in much of what we have discussed this morning, President, the urgency of understanding how development within an unfolding crisis in a complex system of social, economic, and health factors unraveling, we need to be there with governments to look at the role of government, the role of the state, in that core function of being the expression of a social contract and the renewal of social contracts with citizens, but also with actors in the marketplace, and ultimately with the people of a country. And I think we are being tested as UNDP, as every government, to, I think, understand how best to do this. And here to China's comment, for which I'm grateful, that yes, we will keep the development focus. I think that is the essence of UNDP, which is to help countries quickly return to a development path, to be able to turn a crisis not in something that unravels the gains of the past, but allows a country to manage the crisis while keeping a strong view on what it is that actually lies ahead. And you refer to the decade of action. And I think UNDP will very much take out of this board discussion a reaffirmation that we are not a crisis management agency, but we are in the midst, as the DSG has said, a development emergency. And that is why we need to be smart, agile, but remain faithful to the function and the true mission and mandate of UNDP in moving forward. And I think that also speaks to the comments from Finland on promoting SDG 16. We are a key actor because SDG 16 is a very comprehensive view of key areas that define success conditions for other SDGs. But I echo, I think, to the comments by the distinguished delegate of Russia. UNDP is not in the business of prioritizing one goal over another. The minute we begin that, we begin to unravel the very logic of the SDGs as an agenda that has brought together these different goals. But countries will, at different stages, prioritize different goals simply because that is what reflects their national reality and decision-making. And that's why, to the DPR of Korea's remarks, we can indeed be nimble and flexible if we learn how to evolve our operating systems. If you also can, and please forgive me for mentioning this, we could do a lot more. This is what our offer on COVID was saying to you. We were not raising an appeal, but we could do a lot more. You have the infrastructure of UNDP. As you look at your opportunities to deploy the support to countries on COVID-19, please do examine where the benefits are of supporting UNDP, whether directly, whether through joint or pooled funding in its capacity as a socioeconomic lead in the UN system, or indeed as the organization that we today in the annual report presented to you in terms of results. And I think to the EU comments, the integrated national financing framework is already emerging as a shortcut to addressing the COVID-19 financing challenges, the fiscal space dilemmas that countries face, and the fact that the SDG Joint Fund will now finance, I think, 50 of these exercises in which UNDP is centrally engaged with countries will hopefully illustrate that, again, agility and nimbleness are not incompatible with having a view of a longer-term development pathway. I don't think I have the opportunity right now to go deeper into the humanitarian development nexus, except to say that we are very much seized in it. I, together with Mark Lowcock, chair the Joint Steering Committee of the UN family. We are currently fully engaged on 8 countries, including Sudan, in trying to understand how these two instruments can best be deployed so that they're not parallel while being distinct. They're integral to our offer as the United Nations to a country. And President, I end by thanking you for your indulgence this morning. This has been an important discussion. This is not a regular executive board meeting. I think we all sense that, and we stepped in front of you today with a strong view that we want you to have confidence in the strategic plan in delivering results. And indeed, in all our informal sessions, in our reports, and in all the documents and the milestones, interrogate us, challenge us, we will answer, and we will be very frank about where we are not moving fast enough. But the responsibility that I feel right now, vis-a-vis you as our board, is to also give you the confidence that this is an institution that can stand up to the challenge, the likes of which we have not seen in a generation. And that is something that brings us together as a senior management team. But I can also say every staff member of UNDP right now, I have not seen the organization communicate, interact, and learn to deliver and support each other over the challenges we face as I have seen in the last 8 weeks. I think it is a good omen for a very difficult period. And above all, colleagues, please judge us by results, not so much by process. Look at the facts, look at the evidence, and then give us the direction that you feel makes this organization live up to its strength, but also to the expectations of its countries that it serves and the people that ultimately judge us every day on the ground. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you to all of my colleagues also who supported me in answering your questions this morning. And as usual, we could only touch on them, but we will get back to you with some written replies because there were some specific issues I simply could not cover. Thank you, President.
Thank you, Administrator Steiner, and also by extension, thanks to the members of your team who all joined in, and those who were not able to answer directly. We know their input in the work that they have been doing, particularly in this very challenging times. And I also want to reassure members of the board that, as we said at the beginning, questions that might not have been answered and statements that were circulated through PaperSmart with questions will be responded to by Mr. Steiner and the team. So thank you again, Akim, for a very informative and very constructive morning. The board will now take action. I would like to inform the board that the draft decisions on agenda items 5 and 6 are being prepared, and we will revert to this item later to adopt the decisions. Immediately after we close here, we will continue negotiations around the draft decisions. If I hear no objections, I will also take it that the executive board wishes to take note of the annual report on the implementation of the UNDP Gender Equality Strategy 2018-2021, document DPL.2020/11. It is so decided. Colleagues, colleagues, this concludes our morning meetings. We will continue the UNDP segment in the afternoon. We will specifically be addressing country programs. And I look forward to as many of you joining as we had this morning. And I want to thank you for your interest and your support now and today, and for the support that you provide in our guidance to the work of the agencies. The morning meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.